Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to this special board meeting for November 11th, 2024. We'll start with the roll call. Kinsey?
Becker,
Here.
McCoy,
Here.
Lyerly,
Here.
Mills,
Here.
Gerlach,
Here.
Crossan,
Here.
Lee.
I'm sure he'll be joining us shortly. I haven't heard from him, so I'm just going to assume he'll be with us as soon as he can. So, all right, is that everybody? Okay. Next, we're going to move right into action items. Brian?
I move that the employment of staff as presented be approved. Second.
Any discussion or any questions? Kinsey?
Online voting is now open. All votes have been entered and the motion is carried with all board members voting in favor.
I just wanted to make a comment on that. I believe we have one of our newly transferred employees into our teaching ranks that has worked her way up and is working, and congratulations. So.
Yep. Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead.
Yep. I move that the resignation of staff as presented be approved. Second.
Questions or discussion? Kinsey?
Online voting is now open. All votes have been entered and the motion is carried with all board members voting in favor.
Thank you. Next.
I move that Vicky Byer be offered a contract subject to negotiations of such terms to serve as the superintendent of schools and learning of the Green Bay Area Public School District.
Second.
Any questions? Any discussion? I would go ahead, Lynn.
So to me, how it is going to work, like we haven't seen a contract or anything. What's the timeline and that sort of thing?
This is a procedural vote tonight just to open up negotiation discussions. It's just a first step. After this vote tonight, we will have our outside counsel enter into negotiations if indeed any are needed at all. But then we will come back as a board once we've seen a new contract and agree on a new contract. Come back and vote on it in our next school board meeting to finalize it.
So to clarify, will we see the contract before the next meeting?
I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work
Because
yet.
you said if we see it, and I can't remember what else you said that made me think that we were going to already know about it before we come to the next meeting.
Well, you'll certainly see it before you vote on it. Yeah, I just, I'm not sure exactly when that'll happen. That will depend on kind of what happens in the next few weeks leading up to that meeting. So, anybody else? Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that the contents of the contract include at least wording or that acknowledges the accountabilities that are outlined in the job description that the board approved. So we want to make sure that if this outside counsel that is crafting the contract accounts for those things in there.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, James.
I did not prepare remarks, but I do want to make sure that everyone knows that I'm proud to offer this contract to Vicky Byer. There's been twice on the last several years where this district has had a vacancy in leadership. And in lieu of reaching out and finding someone to steward the district for a year or so, Vicky has taken it upon herself twice now to step up and perform duties that far exceed what we would have expected for someone coming in to execute some sort of contract for a year. So I appreciate the board acting in this manner and look forward to the negotiations.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, Kinsey?
Online voting is now open. All votes have been entered and the motion is carried with all board members voting in favor.
Okay. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're going to adjourn directly into our next meeting. Okay. You ready to go? Okay. All right, so welcome to our Board of Education work session for November 11th, 2024. We're going to start with the roll call.
Crossan,
Here.
Gerlach,
Here.
Mills,
Here.
Lyerly,
Here.
McCoy,
Here.
Becker,
Here.
Lee.
I'm going to assume that Ku will join us momentarily. Okay, I'd also like to welcome our ICSE students. Would you please introduce yourselves?
I'm Emerson Krangs and I'm a senior from Southwest. I'm Madison Barris and I'm a junior at Southwest.
All right, well, welcome and please participate as if you feel like it. Okay. We've done the roll call. The next is our public forum. Is there anyone who wanted to speak? Okay. Vicki and I are going to excuse ourselves for just a moment, and James is going to take over. Oh, okay.
All right.
So it's going to be just I will be leaving for just a moment.
All right. So the next on the agenda under updates is referendum update. I think Kale will be joining us at the table. I think that's the only reason why he's here. Oh, have you texted him? All right. Welcome, Cal. You're waiting for a presentation?
Trying to get the slide deck up here. While we're doing that, it's up. Never mind. So for this update and the foreseeable future with the updates, while we are wrapping up the 22 referendum and the 24 referendum, these updates will include both until completed on the 22 referendum. And I've broken that out in the slide deck. Thanks. So I'll start back with our 22 referendum. We've completed a few of the playground projects, as I think most saw last week with the event at Dan's Elementary. Here are the remaining projects currently in construction. We're getting towards the end at the West renovation and addition in the West Stadium. One update I do want to highlight is the speed safety signs. We did have conversation with city representatives last week. That project is delayed as far as the sign driver indicator signs. That project will not be complete until the start of next school year. After discussion with the city, they had unsuccessfully bid the project 2 times and are utilizing a city contract. But with that delay and the work their contractor has currently in place, that delayed their progress until next school year. So you will see progress with the project, but final signs, indicator signs will not be installed at least until the start of next school year.
Just a second, Caleb. Andrew?
Thank you. I'd like to hear more about what's going on with West. West, lost the marching showcase, so those seniors didn't get a chance to participate. It's supposed to rotate every 4 years. Not our fault. That was a third party's fault. But now I believe West's holiday concert has been delayed at least once for auditorium. Has it now been delayed again?
It has not been delayed again. Right now, we're still working through that. Right now, I believe it was pushed to December 18th, if my memory is correct. As of right now, we're still targeting that date. We will keep monitoring the situation. I know there was a delay with a lift in the auditorium, but it's too early to know if that will cause a delay or not at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Next, then you'll see I've slid everything pretty much into this referendum design progress now. The projects that we're currently negotiating with our architectural and engineering partners have moved into a phase of kind of finalizing that design and scope. We would hope to be bringing contracts to the board here shortly as we finalize some preliminary design and scope for the remainder of the 22 referendum projects. All the projects you see here would plan to be initiated by summer of 25, with completion fall into fall of 25. Any questions? This is kind of all we have for the 22 referendum updates. Any question on any of the projects for the 22 referendum? Okay.
Andrew?
Thank you. So actually I wanted to check and make sure because I might have been mistaken, but actually I'm just reading here. There needs to be it appears that there is winter concert changed to January 8th, 2025 at 7 p.m. unless that's since been rolled back due to something about a special coating put on the floor in the theater, and the cure time will correspond with our proposed concert date. So apparently it maybe did get delayed twice.
I wasn't made aware of that yet. I'd have to get more information and then I can get a response back to the board.
I think it's just important to make sure that the smallest high school and a more inner city high school, that people don't, get the wrong idea when their stuff has fallen behind a couple of times. It's not a good look, even when it is. The biggest one being the stadium was outside of our control. So, thank you.
I believe I'm right on this one, Kale. The delay was initially because of wanting to maintain the integrity of the auditorium. Does that?
Yeah, that was the initial delay caused by the historical restoration. The latest one that came out, I apologize, that did not get to me. So I will certainly follow up with our team and make sure that that gets to me for these updates prior to. So that's where we sit. But that initial delay, you're correct, Vicki, was due to the historical restoration. I'm not sure about this one.
Just tell me, the extent of the two roof projects, Washington and East, is that like a whole new roof or repair or what?
That's just a partial replacement. So sections of the roof will be replaced. So that'll lead us into our first update for the 24 referendum schedule. Yeah, very exciting. What we will do is, as we are working with our partners, Nexus, on the scheduling of this, of these projects and the scope of these projects, there are 4 that we have identified that need immediate, that will need to begin immediately. So we've broken these out into phases. We haven't established yet the final phasing of the project. That will be to come later. But initially here, the first 4 proposed projects will be the expansion of Chapel Elementary, Doty Elementary, construction of the new West Side Elementary, and renovations to Washington Middle School. Obviously, the 3 you see there with the expansions and the new construction are directly impacted due to our consolidations and needing to get space ready for students for those consolidations. Washington Elementary, due partially to the roof project taking place there this summer, and the scope of that project fitting in with that first phase are reasons for the phase 1 selection. And as I noted, again, as we finalize the other phasing of the project, then we can share an overall project schedule with the group. And then I just wanted to go into a little bit of detail, and this is what I'll do here moving forward with our first 4 projects. First, our Washington Middle School. So we have started preliminary design. We've met with administrator user group to discuss scope and programming. User group discussions will continue with our architects and engineers to finalize scope. We will then finalize the full design scope and contract with Nexus and our design team. Like I had mentioned, summer of 25 construction with completion fall of 25. And this does include the roofing project in the 22 referendum. And then the Doty Elementary School project renovation and addition. We are in preliminary design similar to Washington. We've met with administrators to discuss programming with our architects. We've started those discussions. We'll be gathering other user group discussions, whether that's from different departments and at the building level. And we are holding our first community input session on November 18th at 6 p.m. Where I believe that had just went out today to our community to join and give feedback on what they're looking for as far as our scope of that project and other needs that they'd like to see with that project. Again, full design scope and proposed contract is in progress and will finalize soon. This would start summer of 25 with completion prior to school year of 2026. Chapel will be a similar that we just went over with Doty. Again, renovation and expansion of Chapel Elementary. User groups had started with administrators and will continue. Community input session here will be November 19th at 6 p.m. And same with this, looking at a summer 25 start of construction and completion start of school 2026. And the last update will be our new West Side Elementary. As the board knows, this contract for design was let prior to the passage of the referendum. User group discussions and have continued and will continue. We will be bringing our current design to the board on November 25th with our architectural and engineering partner, Somerville. We will be holding a community input session with this group as well, November 20th at 6 p.m. And then looking to begin construction spring of 25 and getting ready for the start of the school year in 2026. So as you can see with these 4 projects, a very aggressive schedule and a mix in our 22 referendum projects. It's going to be a very, very busy summer. So we will be trying to expedite contracts and scope and user groups throughout the process. So with that, I'll just kind of open up to questions.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Can you, oh, doggone it. Now the slide's gone. I hope I remember what it said. User group discussions continue for the new West Side Elementary School. Who would that user group be, please?
Feel free at any time to ask me who these user groups are, because there's a lot of them, so I didn't want to spell them all out. But we've met with everyone from teacher groups at MacArthur and Kennedy to special ed groups, facility techs, to administrators in different departments as well. And then also with additional facility staff. So we've kind of broken that out to get the input from each of those that we needed. And we will continue refining the design based on input from them. And then also, as you see, some community input as well.
So for the other schools, you had admin user group, like for Doty and Chapel, and who would that be, please?
Mainly the principals. Yeah, and really there, we did not really engage staff until the referendum had passed. So that's why we've only really made it that far and with that initial programming. But the plan would be similar to what we've done at the new West Side Elementary, is kind of dig deeper into the programs that are impacted and then building staff as well.
Go ahead, Rick.
Just got a question about, I understand the value of user group input. Are we also using input from best in class examples of, modern school design and incorporating those things in there? And
yeah, and I think that's something that we stress with the user groups as well. We're not designing for an individual. We're utilizing the expertise of our architects, our engineers, Nexus as a construction manager, myself and our team and facilities department. And then also, again, that expertise that really comes from the programming and learning, just getting that feedback of what works, what doesn't in our current schools, but certainly tapping the expertise of our architect, engineers, and construction partners, who all have a great background in education, which is why we chose them.
Okay, Brian?
I realize it's more difficult with an elementary school thing, but have we looked at involving student input as well? Maybe looking at our high school students as to what would you have liked to have seen, having been more recent out of school than all of us, with the elementary schools. And I think when we look at the discussion we had with Preble and the bathrooms and the input that the students had on that, I think there's some interesting ideas that maybe our high school students could convey as well into it. So if there's opportunities there.
I don't think specifically we've separated out a user group for that. I would certainly love to. In the past, in other districts, I've had families and students show up to the community input sessions, which I think is a great forum for that. We are getting to the teachers, so I'm hoping to hear feedback there. But that's something we could look at certainly if we want to do something. I've done in the past, again, at the high school level. I'd be curious at the elementary level if it would be successful, but furniture selection, that's one that students, I think, have had some great input on in the past. But I do not have a ton of experience with the elementary level, getting that feedback other than the community sessions, but something I could discuss with the admin teams and see what kind of opportunities we could have there getting that input.
Go ahead.
So with two students from Southwest and Kennedy being an area. Chat with them.
Are you suggesting it from the older, from the students from the high school, like input to the elementary?
I'm encouraging students, if they're interested, to go to the community forums, and they may have some fresh ideas there as well. So.
No, great thought. Thank you. And then we'll look at potentially another opportunity. We will have more community input sessions as well. So we could, I could talk with our communications team of making sure that students are welcome to come to those.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, these updates are going to be coming with a great deal of regularity. And that's because, once again, our community stepped up and supported our district in a referendum. I just wanted to take this moment to just express our deep gratitude to the trust that the people in this community have given to us through this referendum, through many referendums. And I also want to thank everybody who worked so hard to inform the public about this work and why it's important. Many of them are in this room. Many of them are at the table. It was a huge amount of work over many months. And I just take this moment to express that gratitude and thank the public for their trust in our district. Anybody else? Okay, thanks, Kale. All right, we're moving on to education. Who is going to be facilitating that? Brian? Okay, go ahead, Brian.
So I want to thank David Johns and Dr. Khan for coming up. Our first item that we're going to be talking about is the approval of the Human Growth and Development Advisory Committee membership.
Good evening, Board. 2 months ago, we came before you with a charter for the Human Growth and Development Advisory Committee. This is outlined in state statute as a requirement to move forward with any curriculum work around that topic. You approved that charter on the condition that we come back to you with the list of names of community members that will make up the committee. So we bring that before you tonight, and Dr. Khan is here to share that with you.
In addition to the list that was provided in the memo, I just want to make a note that we received names of individuals to reach out to from a variety of groups, including our community partners, various district departments that have family and community partner contacts, school parent groups, student organizations, and previous committee members. And the list that you have is the 10 individuals who did volunteer to participate on this committee. And I do want to note, in addition to the requirements in state statute that Mr. Johns mentioned, that the state statute goes even further to specify the percentage of membership for these groups on the committee. So in most cases, it says cannot exceed 20%, which is why we have to keep certain membership to a particular level. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Lynn?
Just tell me what you mean, what the human growth and development curriculum is and why this, I mean, we don't have an advisory committee for every aspect of our curriculum, do we? So can you give us a little background on this?
Sure. The human growth and development in the context of the statute is referring to anything related to developmental changes associated with puberty, anything related to what was historically referred to as sex ed in the past, parenting, childbirth, and all the topics related to that.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Up next, we have our equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging update. And we have some more people coming up. So we'll have David Johns and Katie Salzers coming up. And Ingrid Parker Hill. So thank you for coming up.
I'm going to turn it over immediately to my colleagues. Their presentation will be on the screen, and there'll be plenty of opportunities for question and discussion.
Sure. All right, I think I got this. I want to acknowledge today that today is Veterans Day. As we celebrate Veterans Day, we want to say thank you to our veterans within the GBAPS community who have served near and far. We honor you today and throughout the year. To the families and friends of a veteran, someone currently serving, or someone who is thinking about it, thank you for supporting them. Now, getting to the EDIB report. Every child has a story yet to be told. Today, we want to share our organization's efforts to the work and commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, or EDIB. We might use EDIB or other acronyms throughout this presentation to condense lengthy phrases. Before we get started, I want to use a simple analogy to help people understand why this work is important. The words equality and equity are often used interchangeably when they are different. Each of us sitting at this table is privileged in the fact we are wearing shoes. If I were a betting person, I would say that we had a choice in what shoes we wore today. Through equality, everyone gets the same pair of shoes. Through equity, we would all get a pair of shoes that fits us. Through diversity, we get different types of shoes. Through inclusion, everyone can access shoes that fit properly, regardless of foot size or shape. They feel comfortable and accepted for wearing them, even if they are different from the majority. The connection to belonging is that we are wearing the shoes we want without fear or judgment. Next, please. think you gotta go that way. You gotta point it that way. That's a little special.
Oh,
Hi.
yeah.
Wait, this one? Side. You try this. Thank you. Okay. Can you?
I can
Uh,
if you'd like.
Thank you. All right. The purpose of our EDIB work is to widen the cultural lens of our staff and students and identify barriers in our system that perpetuate gaps with the goal of improving academic and social emotional outcomes for all students. Sometimes we talk about one or more of the EDIB work. It is met with reservations and puts people in a defense mode. One of the tools we use is the Courageous Conversation Protocol created by Glenn Singleton to support adults in having the conversations necessary to make progress on difficult subjects. Next slide.
So really our goal today is to update the group on some of our intentions. We get it every time. All right, I'll start again. The goal is really to update everyone today on some of the intentional work that we've been doing around equity and engagement. We know that equity really needs to be embedded within all departments, and we know it's happening. It's an ongoing process, but wanted to share kind of that district-wide lens of some of the things that are happening. So prior to doing that, wanted to touch base on what a common definition is around educational equity. A lot of times we say equity, and in organizations that's kind of thrown out as it's almost a buzzword now. So we looked at a couple different definitions, and we used to use Glenn Singleton's definition, which is equally as defining for our organization. But this is a new one from DPI that we thought was specific to our state, as well as some of the work we've been doing. Ingrid and I are on an equity coalition with Dimitri Beekman, who is the executive director, I think, of equity in the state. So educational equity means that every student has access to the resources and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, language, ability, sexual orientation, family background, and or family income. Next. Yes.
I just want the board to remember that when we look at educational equity, that's not just classroom resources. That's also looking at student services. That's looking at counseling services. All the opportunities that we present to our students outside of the classroom as well would be included in that, correct?
You are correct. Really great point. And it also includes policy as well as access to resources, all types of things. So not just human capital, but as well as some of the other things that prevent or provide barriers to students. So thank you. So this jogs some people's memory. We began this work, it's around the EDI plan timeline. So again, Ingrid said we're going to use a lot of acronyms, so I'll refresh your memory. Equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging plan. So we started this work in April of 2021, which if memory serves me correct, that's right after COVID, right? And we began with a survey, and we surveyed all secondary students as well as all families, and we surveyed staff as well, all staff. And the questions were related to equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and to kind of see where everyone, where they felt things were as far as them personally, as well as the district as an organization. So that began our work. There were a lot of stops and starts, and brings us to this point in time where we did develop a plan with all district departments that coincided with the work we did with the task force. So after the Hanover survey, there was a task force that came together. That task force was representative of our student demographics and included students, staff, families, as well as community partners. And we really worked on developing, we did a root cause analysis, but prior to that, we did develop an equity purpose statement as well as equity core values. And then we created some core commitments based on our root cause analysis. That root cause analysis was taking a look at our data to determine where our shortfalls were. And so from that, those 3 core commitments were brought to the board, I think, October of 22, and were adopted. And some of you were on there, some not. So, so wanted to just, for those of you who weren't, kind of give you that jog back in memory. So if you can move on to the next. All right, so this kind of outlines a little bit what we just talked about, but there were 8 dates that we came together to do this work. It was challenging. It was all virtual, and to do a root cause analysis virtually was challenging, but we did it. And then at that time, Vicki and Judy and a few others came together to look at our work and then develop those core commitments. So following that adoption, that's where we began almost a year ago, or maybe it was a bit more, around developing that plan. So each department created a goal under each of the core commitments. So that work has been ongoing and continual, and our hope is to tie that into the strategic planning. So next. What we wanted to do is bring some examples of the current work that would fall within that plan. So the first core commitment is around equitable access. And I won't read that all to you. I'll let you take a look. So similar to what Brian said, you know, what does that include when we talk about equity? So it is around human capital, but it's also around access. And so that's kind of where the first core commitment is. So some examples that we can share with you, I'll highlight on the next slide. So 2 of them are one is under special ed, and then there was a collaboration between teaching and learning and multilingual learners. So the first one is really within special ed is increasing that time in general education. So reducing the amount of time that students are away from their same age peers and having them be included in general education settings. The second one is around professional learning opportunities provided by teaching and learning and multilingual learners, and ensuring that there's equitable implementation across all sites for all students. And I know that work has been underway for the past 2 summers, and I know it continues throughout the year.
You said that after we got the core commitments, then you had all the departments come up with how they were going to support them. What are the departments?
Special education, operations, and under operations includes finance, HR, thank you, transportation, who am I forgetting? Food service. So that's all kind of under operations, but each of them kind of broke off and some work together on that. Legal department, who am I missing without looking at it? And then on the more on the teaching and learning side, which would be teaching and learning department, as well as, well, student services, and that encompasses pupil services, special ed, ML, and what am I missing? Thank you, school leadership. Yep. So those would be the directors to this directors to secondary and elementary. And I'm sure I'm missing a group, and I apologize if I am. Yeah. Did I? Okay, let's see. So core commitment 2, culture of excellence. I'll pause a second for you to read that. All right. So we have provided a couple of examples here as well under core commitment 2. Yeah, sorry, if you can move forward, thank you. Yeah, one more. This is a long one. And okay, so examples for action step number 2 would be human resources has provided training to all hiring supervisors and interview teams focusing really around bias in the recruiting and hiring process, because hiring supervisors, as we know, have much control over who is hired, as well as provide mandatory professional learning to all staff on workplace harassment and discrimination using the Safe Schools platform. And the measurement there is all, so 100%. And then teaching and learning, 100% of the resources brought forward to the board will be kind of run through a process to ensure that the materials are inclusive, as well as rigorous content, so those grade level standards, as well as ensure access to all. And then the last core commitment is around welcoming and safe environment. Thank you. And all of those are within the board memo, so you can refer to them, which is on the board site. So meaning the definitions of those. So the two examples we brought forward here are, in addition, are measurable. The school leadership team will use and explicitly identify CLR and CASEL strategies at every Leading for Learning session and other professional learning opportunities for school administrators. So just for your knowledge, Leading for Learning sessions are the monthly principal and associate principal meetings, and then other professional learning opportunities. And the purpose around that is really modeling what we're asking educators to do within the classroom. And then lastly, through the implementation, monitoring, and support of morning meeting and advisory, students in grades 3 through 12 will show a 5% increase in sense of belonging as measured by the spring panorama survey data. This year we are doing one survey, and it'll end up the cadence will be a spring to spring survey. So yes. Sure. Okay. And then that last goal leads into kind of our next quick update, which is simultaneously while we were working on the EDIB plan, we also began work around helping educators and leaders, all staff, understand the relevance and importance of cultural and linguistic responsive teaching. And so we went into about a 3-year, very slow cycle of the learning with staff. And so that really entailed having staff learn strategies around instructional practices that really validate and affirm all cultures and identities, as well as shifting of everyone's mindset. And when I say shifting of everyone's mindset is how we see and view our students and how they're able to learn, and that it's asset-based thinking really instead of the deficit. And it's also looking and addressing our bias and prejudice, as well as really what we need in order to see all of our students as capable. So that was a part of it as well. Yeah.
Just trying to figure out how to phrase the question. So on the panorama survey, is it tied to, my main goal on this is, we have 40% of our students move throughout the year. Is the question phrased that the student is feeling welcome and secure in their building at that time? So if a student transfers in a month before the survey is taken, they can look at that month of that gain that they've had through advisory circles and morning meetings, I think they were called, throughout that area. So is the question specific to, do you feel, or is there a way that we can look at the amount of time that that student has spent in that building?
That's a great question. So when students move, we are able to transfer them obviously to that school. The point in time in which they take that survey, my thought is they're going to answer that question based on their experience in that time. I can provide, we have the questions that we can provide to you for you to be able to see them. We offer them to families if they're interested. Does that answer your question?
I don't think we can dig into panorama to say that the student was only there for a short period of time, right? Microphone.
the level of data that we aren't currently drilling down into student-specific data. It's general data that we're sharing.
I guess I would hope that there's areas within that, the way the question's framed, and I recognize this is a national program or wherever it comes from, that if that student is feeling like they have gained that by moving in, that it's able to be indicated on that question. So I see that there's a potential for a lot, I've mentioned before the transient population of our students of just moving within our district and in and out of our district. This is a really good opportunity for them to express that they have felt welcome in that month that they've been there, or that 2 months that they've been there, or the full school year that they've been there, that the circles and the morning meetings and the advisory is giving us that opportunity to really build that connection no matter how long they're there, and to just keep building that part of it. And by having these on a regular basis throughout our district, as opposed to just sporadically through some buildings, I think that will show the gains there, especially within our students that transfer within our district, to see, okay, I felt really welcome at this elementary school. For some reason, I'm for whatever reason it is, I'm now at a different elementary school. They do a similar thing. We have that focus on making those connections. So hopefully that will show up as well within that survey, regardless of what school they're started at and what school they finished at. Does that make sense? And I realize that's above our control. I just want to kind of share that with the board, that this could be a really good opportunity for us to see those connections grow.
That's an interesting way to think about working with the data in the future. A couple other things about that. It's not a single question about sense of belonging. It's about 6 to 8 questions, including a couple questions that are about your sense that people beyond the school know about you and care about you. And so it's a bit broader the way those questions are asked. Something we do pay very close attention to is the transition grades and how students answer that question, because it can give us some early later, because it's the spring, indicators that the practices that we have in place that are consistent in all of our middle schools, according to our 6th graders, are helping build that. So transition grades are another important way to look at that data for the impact of those processes.
We also, Brian, have a universal screener that we've started implementing in grades 5 and 8. And so that is also a really good indicator for us of how those students are feeling. And that's called the BIMAS survey or screener. So that's another tool that we started using this is the 2nd year. And it gives us student-specific data in real time, and we can follow up immediately on those students.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to kill the microphone on there. I think the most important thing that we've done is given our staff time to build those dedicated time on there, whether it's through advisory, morning meetings, the other thing that they were called, I forgot, on there of the circles. Thank you. My wife's gonna be upset with me there. I forgot they were called circles, but to have that dedicated time to make the connections, to make the students feel welcome, I think is probably more valuable than any surveys that we do, to show that we've done that. So protecting that time, I would imagine, is key, as is a lot of things on educators' plates with protecting that time, but making those connections obviously is going to pay off tremendously with our students. So
Yes, I think, that sets the tone for the day of, how things are. You'll get to hear from a couple of educators on how, just a 3-minute clip at the end here, so. All right. Yes, thank you. Oh.
I got a couple questions. And so I'm focusing on the word equitable. Does equitable access, is there an expectation that if we achieve that there would be at least the opportunity for achieving established educational objectives or end state? Yes or no? If you have equitable access to those resources, to everything, and it tailors the shoe for the kid, are the expectations of the outcomes, do they also get tailored or modified Or do we have universal set of goals and expectations that are for all children? And then are we making the presumption that if they get equitable access, there's going to be an equitable outcome or an equal outcome with this child? Yes or no?
Yes, but so in terms of everyone has access to the same, let's say, resources, we need to find as educators entry points on how to get them to that. So in other words, we need to make sure that they're able to access it, whether it's because of their area of disability or if it's their home language. We have to make sure that they get an entry point into that to be able to achieve the same outcomes. It might look different along the way, but the end result would be they'd have the same expectations as well as be able to achieve and learn the same content, if that makes sense.
So how do you, then my second question is, how do you quantify inequity? Or do we have good measures in place to assess whether or not children are not receiving an equitable portion of the resources?
I think we are able to see it by looking at achievement. I mean, scores, that's one way. And right now we are underserving some students. And so we're trying to figure out ways to change that or shift that. So if I'm getting or understanding what your question.
Well, again, it goes to, again, we're determining inequity on the end, by the end result of standardized testing procedures. And is that in itself a fair way to measure inequity?
It actually even goes beyond that. Let's take a look at what courses the students are actually enrolling in. That's a starting point. Which kids are taking our AP classes, which the teams are looking into. We have been monitoring it and working with UWGB and NWTC to learn how to better support our students so that everyone accesses and actually gets enrolled in those classes at the high school level. Even dual credit, for example. Primarily white students are taking those classes and students without disabilities. We need to change that.
It's incredibly foundational, but incredibly important. And we monitor at the classroom level students who are experiencing grade level learning. Students who are experiencing lessons where the focus of the lesson is a grade level standard and that the materials that you all approved to invest our community's resources in are part of the experience that students are having, part of, not the only experience, but part of the experience. So there are a lot of directions we can follow with our older students, but fundamentally we're walking it back to the earliest grades so that we can say, second graders, you're moving into third graders as readers, third graders, you're moving into fourth graders as readers. And as the work gets more complex around you, you have the most basic skill you need to be more successful in school. And so really zooming in and naming what grade level instruction looks like, all the components of it, and then being present in classrooms and having developmental conversations with teachers who have always done the best they can with what they have to begin thinking about different ways to use the resources, challenging mindsets around what does it mean that all students are in the class? I have 5 that can't do it. How do I work with those 5? There's a fork in the road there. Send them out or really dig in and work together to find entry points for those students to experience grade level, which they might not be successful on the first time around. So long answer to your question, but I really do believe we have to walk it back to the earliest grades and make sure that our kids are on track for grade level experiences from the very start.
I'm sorry, one more question. Do you see this endeavor migrating towards ability groups of children to, again, if we're tailoring the equity piece of it, it almost begs that you're gonna maybe unintentionally start creating groups of kids with different abilities and enabling them to move down that path because of those factors, which then would result in different outcomes for each group. Is that the intent, or could that end up being an unintended consequence?
It's absolutely not the intent, and you certainly have to watch for that. There is no research on how children learn at the youngest grades that would suggest they should all be together by their ability groups. And so creating lessons that allow students to learn from the teacher and also learn from each other in mixed ability groups is the ideal. But that's the slippery slope that you identified there, particularly when we identify groups and then double down on trying to close those gaps by isolating those students. There's a lot that you lose because you try to go for the quick fix.
All right, we have a couple more slides here and then you'll get to hear a 3-minute clip. Yes, thank you. So the CLR work, just as a real quick piece, you don't have to go back, David, is around really figuring out ways to engage our learners with cultural affirming practices as well as protocols within the classroom. And we'll hear a bit about that. But the other thing that we began as well simultaneously is morning meeting and advisory, and that was during, a group came together during COVID to talk about how do we support our students socially, emotionally during virtual learning. And there had been some requests for advisory time within one of the high schools, and we had not done it prior to that. Once we were in COVID and realized students really needed that connection, we created the advisory time for when students returned on site. So I'll let you kind of take a little bit of a look at that. So really the morning meeting advisory is creating that intentional space for students to be able to connect with one another on a social emotional level, as well as learn some skills. And then looking at the CASEL competencies, we also embedded those. And then we were able to adopt a resource called Culture Responsive Minds, and that the board approved in, I think, the very end of 22, if I'm remembering right. And the next slide. And this just kind of outlines exactly what morning meeting and advisory is. Morning meeting is the elementary age versus advisory being the secondary. We're still working on kind of guidance around that. There's a lot of things that runs through advisory time. Some of the support, academic support, so certain days students are able to go to different classrooms for support. There are some clubs that run through that time, but then there's also the direct instruction around the social emotional learning. And lastly so you'll get to hear from 2 secondary educators here and really focusing on the cultural and linguistic responsive teaching practices. You'll hear Julie Chernaski. She's a middle school teacher at Franklin Middle School, fabulous teacher. And she will talk a little bit about the CLR protocols, which now directly connects to the learning we're doing with Unbound Ed around the GLEAM framework. And I know that you've learned a little bit about that, but I don't know if, David, you want to say any more than that around the CLR piece with GLEAM?
I think it's just important to note that this is balanced work that takes place in those spaces where we have small groups of students together, forming really strong relationships through morning meeting and advisory, and that it moves also into the classroom across all academic content through how lessons are constructed. So simultaneously, we're working with an equitable instruction framework that ensures that lessons are created and delivered in ways that are at grade level, are engaging, and are affirming and meaningful for our students. And so that is really where our eyes are right now when we're in the academic spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, and then the other teacher you're going to hear from is Ellie Hintz-Radu, another fabulous educator. She's at West High School, and she's going to talk a little bit about advisory time. So again, 3 minutes, and then
Thank you. So Maya Angelou said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. So how are we working to do better for our GBAPS community? Next slide, please. So this is a layout of our GBAPS campus and how the schools feed into each other. Next slide. Now this is our students and their culture of ethnic demographics. Take a look at that. There are 41 different languages spoken. Our district is in a good position to help our students be ready and inspired to succeed in our diverse world. How does engagement and inclusion connect to this work and the 4 critical priorities? It is essential to create partnerships between schools and staff, the families, and our community. The silo work of one circle can do good. Connecting 2 circles is better. By being intentional with a collaborative approach, using all 3 circles is best for student outcomes. So what is family engagement? Steve Constantino says, the degree to which families are empowered to be present in the educational and academic lives of their children, and to the degree to which schools and school districts support family engagement by sustaining necessary relationships, which in turn promotes the efficacy of families in helping to shape their children's academic experiences. One way we approach family engagement is through intentional communication. We use one-way communication tools like School Messenger for school notifications, emergencies such as inclement weather, and safety. Our two-way communication tools, such as talking points, staff can use this to communicate with families in their preferred language, and families can also initiate messages through the app. They have translation in over 145 languages and accessibility features like text to speech and speech to text. They also have a help me understand feature to request human translation. We also have Language Line. Our staff can call and get assistance with a live interpreter. The Instant Language Assistant, otherwise known as ILA, is a device for one-on-one or broadcasting. All of our schools have at least one and are invaluable district translators and interpreters. Next slide. Through intentional community engagement, the Welcome Back celebration brings our families, schools, and community together. From the beginning, all hands are on deck, including district staff, our schools, and community organizations. Businesses like Lamers and First Student provide shuttle buses for families to attend, shows just one way everyone is working together. Families and children made their voices heard by sharing their hopes and dreams for the Portrait of a Graduate during this time. Next slide. We are very thankful for the passing of the prior referendum and the most recent one. During homecoming week, it was great to see students and staff at West High School gleam with more joy for their recent remodel. For new educators, we welcome them at their orientation. We have check-in conversations, employee stay interviews, and staff listening circles. All educators use the Danielson Educator Evaluation Tool for professional growth, which has been updated to show more accountability. Affinity groups play a vital role in ensuring an inclusive environment where all are valued, included, and empowered to succeed. A place for staff to have safe spaces to network with colleagues and for people who want to learn more about how to become an ally. We have GBAPS Voices of Equity and GBAPS unapologetically pride. Opportunities for staff to connect with students at the Achievement Summits held at NWTC and UWGB. This is a tiered approach to combating the educational gap. We also have collaborations with the BSUN Group, CISA 6 Center for All, a partnership with the Disproportionality Network, Wisconsin Urban Leadership Institute. Our district-wide Student Success Award celebrates students and their families who have been nominated by their schools and chosen from a committee based on one or more of the following areas: leadership, character, resilience, academic and co-curricular effort and/or improvement, and work ethic. This opportunity was borrowed from our neighboring Appleton School District. Next slide. Thank you. When it comes to community, Green Bay is pretty special. This is why we have made intentional community engagement a critical priority. We often cross paths and build bridges with current and future parents and community members. It is always great to see our students, staff, and their families at community events like the International and Community Festival at the Kroc Center, We All Rise's Juneteenth celebration, the Hmong pre-New Year, and Casa Alba Melanie's Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead celebration. The GBAPS Ambassador Academy is a place where community members can increase their knowledge and understanding of our district's operations, network with others from our community, and provide insightful feedback on a variety of topics. The most foundational indicator of lifelong success is the ability to read. Through equitable instruction, we did this by evaluating our own system and establishing a new curriculum based on the science of reading. We have many community partners that are committed to helping our students set a strong literacy foundation, including Oneida and Achieve Brown County. Our schools can't do it alone, and we don't want to. So we use our networks to continue learning and growing so that our families, schools, and communities reap the benefits. Next slide. The portrait of a graduate is a vision from our families, our schools, and our community for our students to be the future leaders of tomorrow we know they can be, to embody forward skills, character traits, and social emotional competencies that are needed to succeed in a school career, any education after high school, including college, career, and throughout life, living in our diverse world. At this time, I would like to invite Breshay Hansen to share a few words with you.
Hello, my name is Breshay Hansen, and I want to thank everybody for allowing me to speak tonight. The portrait of a graduate is important to me because I am a Green Bay Area Public Schools alumni, an educator, and a parent. When our family moved to Green Bay over 25 years ago, we started our school career in another district. But my twin sister and I were having issues at that school. So in 2012, my parents transferred us to Green Bay West High School for the IB program. I loved going to school there because I had teachers like Lisa Merkel and Ellie Hinsredu who showed me that I belonged and that they cared about my well-being and my success. These two educators made sure that I knew that they believed in me. I never had that before. After graduating high school, I attended NWTC, but was very unsure about what I wanted to do. I started with business, and after the first class, I knew that it was not for me. I changed my major to nursing, but failed the first two classes, ultimately dropping out. In 2017, I began working for the Green Bay Area Public Schools as a monitor. Then one day, an interaction with a student told me that if I taught math, they would actually go to class. Those words were like magic to me and got me thinking. I felt joy when I came to work because I made a difference in students' lives. I became a paraprofessional in 2019 to have more impact on students' education, and I got the opportunity to work with that student once again through math for high school. In 2020, I decided to go back to school to become a secondary math teacher, and I can proudly say that I will be finishing my last class on 12/1. Through the support of the Green Bay Area Public Schools Village, people like Marie Visti, Katie Solzer, and all of my coworkers, I am graduating. I love what I do so much that I drive 45 minutes to work every day, and I have enrolled my son in the district because of the academic options Green Bay has to offer. I believe in this school district, and there's no other place that I will want to be. I can't wait to be that teacher who can positively impact our future leaders by providing equitable instruction and building a culture of excellence so that lifelong learning happens. Thank you for allowing my dreams to come true tonight.
Thank you, Brichet, for being courageous and sharing part of your story. Slide, please. Thank you. In conclusion, the work of EDIB is important because our students depend on our schools and our families and our communities to work together. Our ultimate goal is to build and sustain a culture. As a collective, we do more than survive. We thrive so that every child's story can be told. Together, we are one.
Any questions?
Just a comment. Thank you. That was fantastic. That was a fantastic report. That was the best speech I've heard in this room yet. Wonderful job. Thank you all.
And thank you for choosing to work for our district. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Like, I don't mean to backtrack, but there's a couple things that I just wanted to comment on. So, first, with advisories, at least with our school, so it's like a 38-minute period, and we have the first 2 days of the week, it's in the same room, and then the last 3 days, it's you pick where you want to go. And at least with my experience on it and with my, it is not, I feel like, a positive space for most students. I feel like most people go into advisory and feel like a little bit of dread going into it. And when we have activities to walk around the room, people, I think, just walk around. We're not talking to each other. I think throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, I've always had very positive relationships and strong relationships with my teachers. And I don't feel like advisory is a space where I can like connect or look for help. So, and I think me and Emerson, we're both our parents are staff members at the school, so we can both speak on like we see like a negative response from the teachers as well. It's just frustrating for everyone. So, I guess my comment or question for that is there like, are we asking like the teachers and students like how their thoughts on it, or like what changes we're going to make with advisory moving forward?
I've also had a number of teachers say that they wish that time was just added back to the other classes, especially now with the extra 5 minutes being added to advisory. And they feel that, like, especially as a student, like, I'm lucky that my teacher is someone I've had in class. Like, I've had him as a math teacher as well. So I have a connection with him. But for students who haven't had their teachers, I can't imagine. It's just like someone they don't really know. They see them for 2 days, like for 30 minutes. And it's just, I feel like it isn't beneficial and I don't gain anything from it. I'm also a senior, so I think maybe like if you do it through middle school all the way through high school, it could be beneficial. But yeah, and to which.
I'm sorry. This Oh, sorry. My last comment on that is, we know we were talking about equity, and like on the first 2 days of the week where it's like social emotional learning and stuff, like we do grade checks and stuff. And for me, I have all A's, and um, like with grade checks, it's 5 minutes of me doing, put AAA, and I'm not supposed to be doing homework or my other classwork. Like it's we get in trouble if we're on other tabs or doing other homework. And for other students who I think are struggling more, they're or don't care, they're not filling out their grade checks, and then it's becoming a fight with the teacher. So the students who are like succeeding, I feel like we're being held back, and the students who are struggling a bit, it's just causing more of a struggle for them. So I don't really know the way to fix that, but that's just from my point of view, like what I'm seeing in that.
First, thanks. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Thank you for being courageous and sharing that. I appreciate that. It's helpful. I have a question though. In the classrooms for advisory, are you using that time and space with intentional lessons, or is it kind of left, not you, but I mean your advisory teacher? Or is it unstructured?
There are lessons that they're given to give us. I think it's pretty, from what I see, like 50-50. Like with my advisory teacher, she's giving these lessons. It's very I feel like being talked at instead of doing activities. And then like with a lot of my friends, from what they've told me, it's their teachers it's study hall, like go on your phone, do whatever you want, we're not doing the lesson.
Thank you for sharing that, and we'll follow up because I appreciate that feedback, and we can double check with the principals. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
I'd like to thank the student reps for bringing this up as well. I have heard anecdotally some of these same things before here and there. It didn't rise to the level of me bringing it. It wasn't pervasive enough that I was hearing about it to that I thought it was. I didn't have enough information to bring it to a higher level, but I have heard some of these things anecdotally as well. I think it's if we have if we have the best developed plans and there's not true student and staff buy-in, then they're not going to work. And although I think we've had improvement in culture over well, especially since 2022. I think we've had improvement in culture. I don't know that we have a situation yet where if staff thinks this isn't working, that they maybe feel comfortable speaking out about a problem with a requirement, especially something the district has been invested in. And is the approach perhaps to modify, do less of it, do the lesson part quick, and then give a study hall, whatever's being done, is that the path? Because the other path could look like someone is, anti-equity when really it's just the delivery system. So I think this certainly needs, a deeper look, and there has to be student and staff buy-in, and that's what I've said many times about how one huge disadvantage to a district of this size is sometimes we don't hear about these things unless we just happen to at a board meeting. So we need to definitely look deeper into this. Go ahead.
So my dad teaches Avid, so his advisory it ties in with that. It's all the same students from his Avid class. And I think because of that, they have a bigger sense of community because they have a full class period together. So I don't know if there's a way that maybe it would be beneficial if it's like advisory is a extension of second hour or third hour. Like it's with the same students. That way it's the same students and teacher.
I don't want to belabor this, but how is it set up right now?
So right now it's you get out a second hour at Southwest. At least I don't know if other schools are different, but you get out a second hour and you just go to whatever advisory teacher you have on Monday and Tuesday. Yes, it's organized by like last name, who your counselor is. So the counselors have a set of last names, and then it's like grouped off by that. I didn't know. So then the teachers also by last name.
I'm sorry, stay with the same students for your 4 years?
Originally for freshman year it switched, and then sophomore year it did, and then these last 2 years it has been the same. So I think they've are leaning to make it the same, which I think is a good idea. Mhm.
Has the program been in place for 4 years?
No, meaning program, meaning the curriculum resource.
I mean, this advisory thing, how long has this been going on?
Full rollout was last year with the resource. And there really needs to be some additional learning, but that's on pause right now just because of other things that are being rolled out. We will continue the learning around it. I think at the secondary level, there would be additional learning that would need to happen. Also, as with any class, if the space isn't used intentionally, nor is the content, you're going to have that in any class. So the period needs to be used what it's intended for. And I think it's different at each building as to what that looks like, even the time of day and so on. So, more instruction I think would be helpful for them to learn, because sometimes if you're not comfortable with teaching that, the social emotional piece, you need to learn more.
So, do I understand correctly? These students have had advisory every year, but starting within about the last year, the purpose and focus of advisory has changed.
It hasn't changed. There's just been a board adopted resource that has been rolled out, and there was some learning that went along with that. But there's multiple different resources they could use to supplement some of the lessons. So there are resources available for the learning and for their learning and for teaching. So
I think my takeaway here is the importance of associating the word community with what happens in the advisory time. Equally important that we associate the word community with what happens in the classroom as well. But advisory is a uniquely positioned time to build community. And I think we also need to embrace the various ways that people can build community and do a little bit more empowering for that to happen in a lot of different ways, and look at every structure we have in place and really honestly examine what's standing in the way of that and what could open up some new ways to build that community. So I'm motivated. I appreciate you bringing this up tonight. This is a great venue for this conversation, so that we can deliver on the promises of equity that we just shared and spent the last hour discussing. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our special education update. And David will be staying up here, and we are having Jackie Hauser and Sean Manders, O'Brien, and Nicole Borley coming up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us here tonight. We've heard that through some discussions, the topic of special education or questions around special education have come up. And we are hoping that we may be able to share an understanding of our work. So what we're hoping to do is give you a general background information, talk a little bit about our legal requirements and processes. We'll also share some ways that our outcomes or our progress are reported out on, and talk about how our work fits into the district priorities in front of us. So we'll split up the presentation a little bit amongst all three of us. But at any time, feel free to share questions you may have with us, okay? All right. Oh, I do want to say one thing. I do recognize that everyone around the table may come with a different level of knowledge. And we know that maybe your personal or your work experiences may have provided you that information. So realize some of the information you may find more rudimentary than others, but we want to make sure everyone has that same even playing field when we talk. So thank you.
Okay. Okay. We're going to start then. What is special education? And special education provides services to students ages 3 through 21. And it's for students that are then serviced underneath Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And it's to provide a free and appropriate public education. The educational services that are provided in a different ways, variety of settings, and the services are designed to meet the individual needs of the students. There's no one size fits all approach for special education. And then we are required by law to do child find, and that's where if a person in the outside community has a suspicion of a student having a disability, they are able to report it to us. We are required to go out and find and evaluate students that we feel may have a disability, and then we would follow our special education process. Green Bay does have a process because we are required to make sure that it is up on our website in a parent-friendly manner. Click on that. You don't have to right now, but if you want to read through that process.
That process does start at age 3. Just wanted to add that that process does start at age 3.
Our students go through the EMLSS process, or Equitable Multi-Level Systems of Support, before they would be referred for special education. So when a student begins to struggle within the classroom setting, either academically or socially, emotionally, they are provided support through the general education teacher first, and that's where you're going to see that 80% down on the bottom. Most students' needs are able to be met or differentiated within the classroom setting. If they're still continuing to struggle, then we would put some additional intensive interventions in place for that student. It's not quite individualized at this point necessarily all the way down to find that little piece that we're looking for quite yet, but it does become more intense, and we progress monitor to ensure that we are making progress for that individual. Then if they continue to struggle, we do provide more intensive interventions, and that's about 5% of our students. At this point, we're really targeted, so we're looking to close that gap either academically or social emotionally. And then we are progress monitoring more intently as well on grade level to see if we're making progress within that intervention. So the referral process, once we receive a referral, the team reviews all of the existing data. Excuse me. So that's looking at the student's strengths and any area of concerns that they may have. And then we look at what assessments we may need to complete. So we're going to go out and see if we need to look at the student within the classroom by doing an observation, if we need to do a parent or student interview, teacher interview, and then we also outline any formal assessments that we would need to take. Once that's all looked at, we then get written consent from the parent to move forward with the evaluation. The team then comes forward and meets together to make a determination of whether or not that student meets the criteria for one of the categories. And if they do meet the criteria, they then look at whether or not that student has a need for special education services. And if that's determined to be a yes, then we receive parent consent and we would move forward with a placement. This is a visual of the timeline I kind of just talked through. So that first part is where we would receive a referral for special education. Once that comes in, we have 15 days to go through the next few steps. So we're going to look at that existing data again, and then we're going to make sure that we put that paperwork out to the parent so that they can either agree and move forward with the evaluation process, or if we're not going to be moving forward with the evaluation process. Once we receive parent consent, we then have 60 calendar days to complete that evaluation. And during that time, that's when we would do the observations, the formal testing, student interviews, parent interviews, and then we would come together to make that determination for whether or not the student would receive services. From there, we have 30 days to set up an IEP meeting. Typically, we hold both of those meetings together. That seems to be more parent-friendly. We go over the results and then go right into how we can help to support the student. Yep.
Just for my fellow board members, the process, most of the time the case managers are school psychs, correct, on it for the evaluation process. And the evaluation and approval of an IEP is taken place by the IEP team, not by an outside doctor giving a reference to it, and not by, I mean, we have great partners within our medical community, but they are two completely separate things. So if a parent's doctor says the student should have an IEP, it's still the determination of the school, the special department, but most importantly, the IEP team following the criteria that we have set up by the state, following the different guidelines on that. So they're two completely different creatures out there. So while there's input by medical professionals, this is something that's determined by our school psychologist and the IEP team, which is regular ed teacher, special education teacher, LEA, all those things that go into it. So for my fellow board members, that's a big process with it. Correct?
Yep, that is very correct. Yeah, so they run separately. We have to consider what outside resources, such as a school or a doctor would state, or if there's an outside evaluation, those are considerations, but they do not drive the determination. The determination is actually driven by the IEP team, and that is due to an educational impact on the student within the school setting. So they impact each other, but they are not the determining factor. Do you want to go? And that actually leads us into the evaluation teams. So we do have 6 evaluation teams that work throughout the district. They work in conjunction with our buildings, and they are the case manager. So they are what we would call the person that kind of oversees to ensure that we have all the compliance pieces in place. We are consulting with the parents, the building, and they collaborate all together as we move forward with that evaluation meeting. The evaluation team also has a special education teacher on there. We call that a program support teacher at the level that they are, and they also work directly with the schools. They talk to the special education teacher at the schools to ensure that there's a smooth transition into the special education setting, and they are also part of the process of doing observations and formal testing as well. The evaluation teams also assist our building school psychologists in the reevaluation process when there is another disability area that is being considered as well. So those are kind of the overview of the evaluation teams.
These are the disability categories that we do look at and consider during the evaluation process. There's quite a few, but based on the referral and what the family or the school is looking for, we will look at specific areas to focus on. We always make sure it's comprehensive, and we're looking at the student's disability related needs and how are they linked to what we're looking at for concerns of a student. The focus is always on that need rather than the label. So sometimes people are looking for a specific label, but we always say it's the services that we provide. It's not about what that label is necessarily. We're trying to meet those disability related needs.
I have a question about that slide in particular. Where are you seeing the biggest set of issues coming from on that list? Well,
Can you clarify what you mean by issues?
what is the predominant category of issues that and special educational needs? Where are you seeing these of all those bullet point categories?
Right now, our biggest areas are specific learning disabilities, speech and language, and autism are our top 3 in Green Bay. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more as we go too. But those are kind of our area with our highest level of numbers.
So when we want to talk about if a student qualifies or doesn't qualify for services, so oftentimes if we're doing an evaluation, the student will not meet the criteria for special education, and that is a positive, right? Everyone's looking for that, but if we have to celebrate that the student is making growth and doesn't need special education services. But at that point, we would provide the family and staff any recommendations that can be done within the general education setting. If there is a disability identified, the IEP team does need to look at which category the student qualifies for special education, and then do they actually have a need for the service. So when we're talking about what a need for services is, do they need specialized instruction in a specific area that the general education service team cannot provide? So if they do not have any specific specially designed instruction needs, then we could be looking at a 504 plan, which was just really focusing on accommodations that could be provided for any student in that setting. If we're saying yes, they do have an area that we need to specially design instruction, then we would write an individual education plan for that student, focus on their disability related needs, and then how are we going to support them in their learning. So it's really about the services that we're providing and not necessarily a program. Special ed is a program, but it's really services that we're providing for each student.
So when I read the first part, no disability, I'm thinking, okay, no disability now. But so what you're saying is a student can have an IEP even though that student has been judged to have no disability. No.
Nope, they would have to have a disability in order to have an individual education plan. Oftentimes, if a student does not meet the criteria, they might end up with a teacher-created plan or a plan that the school helps support their needs in a different way. Okay, next slide, please. These are just all the areas of an individual education plan. We always want parent input because the parent is part of the IEP team. And so we want to make sure that they're providing input and we're working together in collaboration. We are looking at what is that specially designed instruction. So it might be reading, writing, and math. It could be social skill instruction. Could be something like emotional regulation support. We're looking at what are those disability related needs that we really need to focus on and support the student. We also provide accommodations and support modifications, and then really focusing on what are those specific goals that we need to address, and then what is the action plan of how we're going to address those goals. And just like anything else in education, we do progress monitoring to ensure that we're either having the student make progress, and if they're not, we might do some review and revise to look at how is a different way that we're going to support that student and help them be more successful in their education.
What do you do if a child doesn't have parental support?
As far as like homework help or with
Let's just say they don't have active parents or.
Often the goal of any educator is to make the 8 hours that student is in school the safest and most productive time of their day. So as an educator, I look to make sure that that student knows that they have the connections like we talked about with advisory, that they have trusted adults there that are supporting them, and that those 8 or 9 hours a day that they're in the school is our time to run and shine with this. Now, we've done a good job as a district of making sure that we have a family and community engagement person. We have other opportunities there that we've partnered with outside groups, but really running with that time and stressing with that student that this 8 or 9 hours that you're here, you're safe, we're going to be productive. You have adults here that are supporting you and trusting you. What happens outside, you know, you continue to make those connections and hope, but assure them that that 8 hours or 9 hours that you're here is going to be productive and safe.
I would say some additional ways that we do that though as well is we try to find convenient time for parents. You know, sometimes it's not convenient at the time, you know, for the parent as it may be for us. So we try to be as accommodating as possible to meet their needs. A lot of people want to be involved, but it might not fit into the box that sometimes we may have. I think we also look for people that may be involved to be part of that team. Do they have a school member that they have a connection with? Could they be part of it? Do they have some outside people that the parent may through a release allow to be at the meeting to provide that input? I think sometimes we just get creative that way to make sure that that student is represented by someone.
But is there an absolute legal requirement that a parent or someone in a legally parental type role be actively engaged or like sign documentation and things like that? I mean, there must be laws that govern this quite.
In order to qualify and have consent for special education, parents do have to sign that consent form. Beyond that, we always invite the parents and we want them to be part of the process. But there are some, if we invite parents and we try to work with them and they are not able to come in, we do have to document 3 attempts. But oftentimes our schools are really great, 6, 7, 8, 9 attempts, you know, what works. And they try to make it as easy accessible for families.
I have absolutely no doubt that your staff do everything they can to pull parents into the process if there's any kind of issues. I just was wondering about the legal boundaries and I know we have children who don't necessarily have parental figures in their life.
We also utilize, like if a parent is not actively involved, maybe they'll let a grandparent come in and participate or a different family member. So we try to utilize all of those resources as well. But back to your original question, I would also say that our special education teachers who work with our students need to be the biggest advocates for our students. So even if there isn't that support, we hope that our teachers are the ones advocating for them and supporting them.
Yeah, those special ed teachers are fierce.
And also the makeup of the team requires that as well, that there's a regular education teacher there as well to advocate for the students. And, you know, it's a federal regulation as to who's participating in the meeting as well, or invited and participating in the meeting as well. So there's lots of safeguards there.
And then if we can go to the next slide. So part of the services, there's different areas and there's supplementary aids and supports. And those are typically things that can be done in a general education classroom that would give them access to the curriculum. As we heard in the last presentation, we want to make sure that students have that point of access. So that could look like sitting in a different spot in the classroom. It might mean a test is read aloud. It might be the use of read, write for Google, where a student might not be able to necessarily write all the things that they need to write down for an assignment, but they could use that assistive technology and that would do the writing for them. So we find different ways to access and give them the support in the general education classroom. And then we have specially designed instruction, and that's really that direct instruction of what do we need to teach so the student can work towards those disability related needs. And then how are we working towards those goals? And then related services are just what are additional supports a student might need. So we're talking about speech and language services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, that might be social work time, working with a student, just different ways that can provide those additional layers of support. And then program modifications, I always call that what is changing in the adult practice, right? So are the staff in need of some professional development around something specific, or maybe it's communication between the teacher, the IEP teacher and the general ed teachers needing to talk and collaborate and making sure everybody's on the same page. Here's our continuum of services. We look at the bottom, regular education. That's the least restrictive environment, all the way to the top, which is homebound or hospital. Our goal always is to have least restrictive environment. So providing students the support that they need in an environment that makes the most sense for their learning. So you'll often hear about students being in cross-categorical programming, and that's really general education and the special ed teacher wrapping around. You'll hear about different resources, and we really try to meet the individual needs. And so our goal is always to provide what they need. Again, not programs, but what are the services that they specifically need. We also are responsible for equitable services. So for any student in the Green Bay School District that is not attending a public school, but they might be at a private school or a parochial school, we are responsible for that child find obligation. And then we do have a percentage of our grant that needs to be allocated for the private and parochial schools. And it's not called an IEP. In the private schools, it's called an individual service plan that we do work with the schools.
Just got a question about the child find obligations. That's a mandated from the state requirement to identify federal, to identify if a child possibly has an issue. But then it stops short of with parental consent, whether or not you can move beyond just simply identifying it. Do you see that as a problem?
So parents have the right to determine what type of services they're hoping for their child to have or not have. Our obligation is to point out if there's a need, and if we feel there's a need, what we would provide. So with the equitable services for private and parochial, there is a level of service. Is it the same as the service that would be in public? No. But it is to the level of what their funds provide them. So we do hold consultation meetings with them each year, and they determine what they would like to spend their service money on.
I appreciate you speaking to that, because several times at this board table, we talk about special education and the funding of special education and this obligation that we perform this service, but we often are not, well, not often, but sometimes we are not the provider of the services, that we do this on behalf of the private schools in the area, and maintain that consultation throughout, which is time, resources, and expense. Appreciate you making that point.
So I have a question with that. Now, when a student transfers and they have an IEP and they're receiving services from an IEP for a different district, there's a whole process that goes in, you know, whether transfer in, and there's a ton of paperwork that goes within making sure that the district can meet that need. If a student transfers into a public school district with an individualized service plan from a private school or a private or parochial school, what's the process with that? Is it treated similar to an IEP, or does it start the process over? What's the process with that?
Just to clarify, are you saying they're leaving Green Bay and going into, or vice versa?
The vice versa. So if a student comes into Green Bay or any public school in the state and they have an individualized service plan, which I'm not sure what the guidelines are of the makeup of that team and all the federal law with that, what's the responsibility of the school district?
Sure. And I'm going to give the information kind of both ways so it makes sense. So if it's an IEP and they go to the private and parochial, We take the current IEP and we do what we call a flip to it, to flip it to an individualized service plan, which that means the team there, along with our team, since the student has qualified and was receiving services, we talk about what we would provide in that setting. So it might be one session a week for 20 to 30 minutes for reading. That might come out of it, out of the larger IEP. Let's say the transfer is back, as long as we have something current on file and it's relevant for the evaluation. We would do a transfer back in, create an IEP. Sometimes we may just do a temporary IEP, maybe not having all the information from the last couple of years, and then hold a review, revise IEP meeting to make sure that we have all the services and identified needs in there with the transfer back.
So if a student transfers in, they enjoy all the protection that an IEP would be given. The same process, the same procedure coming back in, regardless of, well, I shouldn't say regardless, that's cynical of me, but it would be adapted from the services that they were providing or receiving under the individualized service plan, which may not follow the same guidelines.
So our ISPs, we are viewing as under the same guidelines because we're still looking at a disability related need.
I got you on that. If they are receiving a set amount of services from the fund at a private or parochial school, that may not be the same rigor that we provide in a public school.
That could vary depending on the location.
Thanks.
So just to be, I mean, this is a delicate thing to talk about, but I've been on this board now for 7.5 years, and I have lost track of how many times I have heard stories about people who with children with special needs of all sorts who transfer into our district from a private school because that school just cannot begin to offer these children what we can here in Green Bay. So that's when I start thinking about reimbursement and the mandated services, which is our honor and privilege to provide for children. But you know that those we are reimbursed at 32% for special ed, and private schools are at like 90 something, I believe. 90. Okay. That will never make sense to me. And I think of everything you've already talked to. I'm not sure where we are in the presentation, and it's a great presentation. We rarely get to drill down like this. But that, again, that will never make sense to me, why those reimbursements rates are so different, and how we are able to offer so much more to these children. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Are you okay? Yep. Okay. Oh, okay. And Jackie already shared some of this, but we do have the consultation meetings to determine how the schools would like to spend their money. So every late spring, there is a memo that goes out to all the schools, and they talk about here are the options that we can provide. And as the whole collective team, they determine what that money will be spent on. It's usually right around $200,000, and typically and historically, they've had one cross-categorical teacher to provide services and a speech and language therapist.
Just for clarification, when you're saying look at what the schools have to decide, that's the private and parochial schools. That's within the Green Bay School District. We're spending a lot more than $200,000 providing services for our students.
Yes, it's just for our parochial schools.
Okay, we're going to switch over to a little bit more about our schools and our data. So we receive our information from the October 1 count, which is all in WISE. And you can see our number from last year was 3,146 students. We were up between 50, 60 students from the year before. That being said, I know before the question Rick had is kind of what the breakdown is. So that's the number of students you can see, and you can see we've kind of stayed consistent or gone up a little. But the next slide will actually show you what the breakdown is when it comes to those disability categories that we use by the state. And so you have SLD, SL, autism, other health impairments, significant developmental delay, EBD, hearing, orthopedic impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. And you can see some of them are much lower in numbers in our district than others. So that being said, it kind of shows where the needs are according to the percentages of students. So as Nicole talked about before, most of our students in the district would receive services through cross-categorical teachers.
But it'd be unwise to look at that and assume that the funding would be equivalent to that as well, because some students they're going to be requiring more services and services become more expensive with that. So to look at a student receiving services for one area and say this is the dollar amount being allocated to each student because they receive services would be a tremendous error on a budgetary look of it, correct?
That would be a huge error, as obviously there are higher needs. There's things of equipment, number of students we're servicing. So for our intellectual disabilities in areas like that, there are many things that may come into that area and be incorporated into the cost. So that's a good point. Although that might be the criterion area that has the most, that doesn't necessarily mean, but you also have to look at, when you look at SLD, that's probably primarily where a lot of our cross-categorical teachers are, where we have a higher number of teachers as well.
I don't expect you to answer this. So when the state looks at giving out a voucher based on a set amount of money, it doesn't matter what services are being provided. They're getting a voucher for $15,000 for a student receiving special education services, no matter what those services are outside of our setting. And I believe, I'll look at Angie, even though she's looking at something, that still comes from our budget with it when a student receives a special education voucher going to another district, a private school. You don't need to answer that.
Oh, yep.
So I was told that the number of children in special education is going up. Do you have information as to why that's happening?
I think you're prompting me for the next slide. So it kind of fits in perfectly. You've been helping me a little bit that way today, Rick. We are seeing nationally, nationwide, that we are seeing an increase in students with disabilities. A lot of it appears to have been kind of a side effect from the pandemic. It's kind of when they started looking at numbers, as there's a couple things that happened at that time that we talk about. Part of it is the academic recovery for some of our students has not been as quick as others. Some students weren't identified during that time, although we were still doing evaluations. People weren't being identified, as well as we've had some preschool students that have not had any early intervention because of that, who we're seeing come into our schools 5, 6 years old for the first time, that we know about them, and they may be nonverbal. They have some significant needs that have not been addressed yet in any form of schooling nor birth to 3. So that's kind of where it is. I did link an article there if you want to read. There's been a lot out there right now in the media in regards to this, kind of looking into it. We as well, we're looking at a magazine for autism where they're talking about the increase in autism in the nation right now and looking into some of the things coming along that way. But it is definitely being looked at. We're hearing it from districts, public districts around us, as well as state and.
How about racial, the demographics are, what is the breakdown in the district that in those categories?
Sure. So when we look at some of our data, and especially when we talk about the joint federal notification that we are required to look at racial disproportionality in the district. And so we have looked at racial disproportionality for years now, and we had been identified for many years as overqualifying students who were First Nations or Black in the area of emotional behavioral disabilities. We currently 2 years ago came off that, and at this point in time are not considered disproportionate when it comes to the percentages we have for evaluations or receiving special ed services. We have been in the past though, and then we need to put money toward addressing that factor, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So as with all students, our students as well report on the forward. We have seen some good data the last 3 years. We have seen a decrease in our students that are in that what we used to call below, now called developing, and we've seen an increase in that what we call basic to approaching. We continue to hope to work our way up with that, of making the gains we are with our students. So this is the district report card and where we sit with that. So we hope, like I said, to be moving into the proficiency area as we continue to move students up. The next slide shows actually when it looks at growth, you can see that our students with disabilities are in the area of math and English language arts making the same growth level as our students without disabilities. The only thing that's problematic there though, right, is to close the achievement gap, we have to make more than that. But we're not making less, but we're needing to continue to accelerate that learning to close the gap. But right now we are making the same growth as our gen ed peers. So I talked a little bit when Rick was asking the question about a joint federal notifications indicator. So this comes out from us every year from DPI. We are reported out on the requirements of, and we are looked at in 3 areas. We're looked at in compliance, we're looked at in our student results, and then we're looked at for racial equity. And we get the reports on these indicators earlier for results and compliance, a little bit later, like around April for the racial equity. And we'll share a little bit where we are and have been with that. So when it comes to compliance, these are those, when we talked about it before, these are the timelines we have. So we have a certain amount of time that when we get a birth to 3 referral, that we have to have it in place and in process. That's a timeline. When we do an evaluation, when Sean talked about here's the 60 days we have, that's a timeline. All of those situations are talked about when it comes to reporting. We also are required for any student 14 or older to have a transition plan, and those have to be in and considered compliant. When it comes to compliance, you get 2 points for everything. We get our maximum points. We have no issues with our results there. The second part of it is our student outcomes or our student results. Those things are, we gave examples there, test participation. Do we have 95% of our kids taking the test in math and ELA? Our English language proficiency, our math proficiency, our dropout rate, our ed environment, and ed environment is for trying to look at least restrictive environments for all kids, and we do this in 2 different areas. Preschool students, kids 5 through 21. So all kids we service, but they're viewed differently that way. When it comes to that, we did not score enough points, and with that leads to action steps that we work through with DPI. When I talk about that, the action steps are really created by a team of staff members. So it's bringing teaching and learning in with pupil services, special education, everybody to talk about how do we come to better results in these areas. Any questions on that before I move into the racial portion of it, the test, or the assessment, I should say? Okay. As I shared, we were considered disproportionate for several years when it came to Black students for EBD and First Nation. And at that time, we had to do that same thing. We had to meet with DPI and put together an action plan, and that as well was a collaborative team. We have not been on that for 2 years, and that's a huge accomplishment for being a district the size we are. You won't see that with many of the other Big 5 districts right now. But that's something we definitely need to keep our eye on, and our evaluation teams are always keeping in the forefront of making sure we're using equitable measures when we're evaluating students. When we are disproportionate, we have to allocate 15% of our flow through grant to address that concern. So how we've done this in the past is because it was areas of EBD, we looked at paying for some of the behavioral interventionists on the general ed side. We paid for literacy coaches around the reading achievement on that side, and knowing that sometimes if there's struggles with literacy, right, that might lead to behavior. But we have to work at it from the general ed side to not over identify. Questions for that? Yeah.
Is there an unintended consequence to not report the child just to stay off the bad list?
No. We need to do what's in kids' best interest, and if a kid needs services, we would provide those services. We train our staff more along the lines, Rick, to be looking at are our tests and our assessments, are they drilling down to what we're hoping for? Are they biased in some ways? Things like that is what we're looking at. Making sure we have a good representation of who we're getting, maybe teacher interviews from, things along that lines, to have a strong representation. But we would never not provide students a service that they needed just to make that look good. We've been on that list before, and we've worked through that through the compliance with DPI.
I think we also do a really good job of meeting those students in different learning environments as well that the district provides that we've talked about before, as far as it may not be in a traditional school setting, but they're still receiving those services to focus on, specifically if it's a behavior service to meet those students, get them back into a traditional setting, or meet them where they're being successful. So with some of our more unique schools, that's kind of one of the goals as well with it. So, correct.
So, it sounds good that we would take a hit on the compliance rather than say no to services for a kid, but there is a compliance culture. And as much as I would love to know that we have told some higher agency to buzz off because these kids need the services, but it seems like the pressure, even maybe on a subconscious level, that maybe the tiebreaker for a minority kid might go the other way if we're getting nailed on some politician's report.
So I think that's something that we had looked at a while both ways. Pressure maybe a little bit from the school community of supports, pressure a little bit from families, which is why several years ago we did go to evaluation teams who maybe don't have that strong of a connect with the school community and have the ability to maybe take some bias out of things that others maybe wouldn't if they were close to it. And I think with them and them able to calibrate themselves around the criterion and how they're evaluating students, that has allowed for us somewhat to make some changes in some of the numbers you've seen.
Just to follow up then, I guess if, then one of two things, either we were over-identifying and now we're doing better and we need to own that, or there's kids who maybe should be getting services that aren't because of these new teams. And of course, it sounds great to say the first one because that's a past problem that we've moved on from. I just don't know how we know that for sure.
And I would say it necessarily isn't just a past problem because we're still sitting there in some of the areas where we might just be under what's considered disproportionate. And there is the ability of 1 year to flip us over to something else. So I wouldn't say from our data out there right now that we don't as well all just need to be making sure we're making curricular choices for students that work, making sure we're keeping up with our criterion and our evaluation processes to make sure we're staying where we are. But there's no guarantee that that won't change at points in time.
Okay, one more follow-up. So is the standard, this ideal standard that's set for us in Washington, that theoretically the same number of students would have disabilities from every ethnic group? Because not every group gets the same kind of access that may or may not lead to how affected someone is.
So what it looks at is the percentages from that, and if we are representing a certain subgroup, double what we are other areas. And so through our public education, we have access to many different things for kids. And there are, in several of our criterion, there are at times exclusionary factors.
Okay, so it's double. It's not small differences. It's if a category is double identified, then baseline.
Sorry, it's if the risk ratio is 2 times or more.
I really appreciated this conversation because I know that the devils are in the details. These evaluation teams, when they're out doing the identification, are they aware of our compliance status, their contribution to our compliance status? Because the simple firewall that I would put in place is no, they should not be familiar with their contributions to our compliance. They should do the identification role, follow the procedures, and then how we deal with the compliance. To Andrew's point, they should not be at all biased by numbers when they're doing their job. Is that how things are set up?
So, no, they are aware of it because our information is all public about it, right? Because as we're talking about like culturally responsive practices and testing measures, we're looking into with the state at times what might be a more culturally responsive assessment for areas. They're part of those conversations, but at the same time, there still is a state criterion in front of them that they have a team of people weighing in on, right? Because it's not just one individual, it's not the school psych or the PST working there making that decision. They're taking information from classroom observations, teacher interviews, parent interviews, outside medical. All of those are coming together to make that decision. So it's not just them.
So the Department of Public Instruction over the last couple of years has really done a lot of work around comprehensive evaluations too. So some of the areas that we were disproportionate in, they spent a lot of time reorganizing how the criteria is presented, looked at, reviewed, and put in safeguards. So I think that's really helped our teams to talk through some of these scenarios as we're looking at the identification. So it's not just the evaluation teams that have changed their practices. The Department of Public Instruction has changed their practices, which is leading us into a more comprehensive evaluation. And theoretically, the way that it's all done now, you should see that decrease. So they're really working on a lot of those items on their end.
And our speech and language department has been working with DPI and UW Milwaukee for the last 3 years on comprehensive evaluations that are culturally responsive. So we've been working with that team and really looking at the evaluations and looking like at the speech and language criteria and making sure we're looking at those rubrics, and all of the entire 52 speech and language therapists have all been working on that. So it's been a really good process for them to go through.
When a student qualifies for an IEP within Wisconsin and transfers within the district, so if we receive a student from Holman and the student has already qualified, there's no wiggle room on that. They've qualified based on that district within the state. If the student moves from outside of the state, there's a little bit more reevaluation part of it. So that initial evaluation specifically within the state carries and transfers within the student. If a different district is really qualifying a lot of students and that student moves to Green Bay, we don't really have any control over whether that student has qualified or not. It's kind of a professional judgment and expectation that this within the state. If a student moves into the district or moves out of the district and is in the middle of the evaluation process. So if we get a student from Appleton that has begun the evaluation process but hasn't qualified, where does that put the student in Green Bay?
So if they're in the middle of the evaluation process, then we pick it up. We're able to extend that evaluation out. And I just want to circle back to what you had said. So if we disagree, even if it's an LEA in the state of Wisconsin, we can initiate a reevaluation. And one of the cool things that DPI has recently done is they are ensuring that students that meet the emotional behavioral disability category has to meet the same criteria they did initially meet. So that's also helping with some of that disproportionality. So they put some pretty good safeguards in place.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Go back. I apologize. Yeah. The one area, when we talk about, like I said, the last 2 years we haven't, but we are right now monitoring discipline currently with the principals. We are on, it looks at a 3-year kind of trajectory. We are looking at being disproportionate for some of our special education. Sorry, in this upcoming year, we would be then looking to create a plan in that area. So that's always kind of how it works, is when there's the problem and it seems to be going over time, then you work with DPI to put a plan together on how to address it. We're not there now and hopefully won't be, but we're looking at the work with the principals now to be proactive with it. So as we look at how our department fits into the focus priorities that have been laid out. So we continue and have made a very strong push for inclusive practices through both our curriculum adoptions and different grant work we're doing. So through the new HMH work, working very heavily with teaching and learning, multilingual learners and all departments to try to make sure that our students are getting access to the curriculum. Nicole commented on how the Wisconsin Collective for Comprehensive Assessment for SLPs is. So like making sure we have inclusive practices and are looking at those. We also are part of the Social Emotional Learning for Early Childhood grant this year, which looks at inclusive practices for students. And this allows us actually, which has been very nice, to work with some 4K and Head Start teachers as well, even though they are not special education teachers, so they're learning alongside with us, which has been very positive. In response to student needs, this year we as well are doing a lot of analyzing of our seclusion and restraint and discipline data with administrators. We're talking through those cases. We're talking about steps we can take to make sure students are in the classroom, providing instruction instead of outside of the classroom, and working through the behaviors. And then last, for high quality instruction, and Sean and Nicole are going to be talking about this more, but we are regularly recruiting and working to retain our special education teachers. I'm sure you have seen in many articles and in the media that there is a shortage of teachers, but especially in the area of special education. And all areas of that, meaning our speech and language paths, DHH teachers, educational interpreters. So there's many areas. So we work very heavily with the Human Resource Department to make sure we're taking steps along that lines. I know you guys talk about funding as well. So this lets you know what we as a district fund under when you hear Fund 27. So I'm not going to read through them all. You can see the level that it is with different teaching areas, educational interpreters, paraprofessionals, bus aides. Yeah. It also is our related service providers like speech, audiology, nurses, program support teachers, PTs, OTs, all of that comes out of Fund 27. And then some things that maybe you're not always aware of. So a portion of our school psychs, our school social workers, our counselors, our special ed administration supervisors come out of Fund 27. And so when we talk about that funding, recognizing the different layers that that provides support for. Yeah.
Are there any particular schools in the district that have a more acute staffing issue than others?
When you say acute staffing issue, are you meaning like that have a higher need right now? We are pretty well staffed right now. We are short, I believe that we're covering internally or with subs and supporting that way. I think we are short 4 teachers at this point in time. And they are a variety of schools.
When we look at staffing and the impact that has on Fund 27, as well as the other slides that showed the staffing, a lot of these positions are not bachelor degree positions either, correct? School counselors have a master's degree, speech and language pathologists have a master's degree, OT and PT have an advanced degree. So there's a significant amount of, not only is this an expensive, just the numbers, these are specially trained teachers with advanced degrees to have the qualifications to get the licensure on it. So not saying one is more valuable or anything else with that, but just the amount of education that goes in to get these the people qualified and licensed by the state is another significant. It's an impact on the budget in 2 different areas on that. So when the state's looking at the reimbursement rate for special education being very low, that's kind of a double whammy with it, where a lot of these positions are, correct?
That is accurate. And I will also share that at this point in time for some positions like speech and language pathologist, we have had to go to virtual services just because we do not have on-site staff for that. And the amount for contracting with outside agencies, they take a portion of it too, besides what they're paying an employee, right? And so that as well gets to be a very heavy cost. So I think people kind of commented on this before, but when IDA was passed, there was the backing that it was supposed to be funded 40% federally. And currently the federal government pays about 14. So there's always a little bit off, but it's around 14% that they currently do, and the state's coming in around 30. So that means the rest of the funds are coming out of local funding. The grant or local funding is paying, the grant is paying for the certain percentage, the state's paying for 30, And then the district is paying for anywhere between 50 to 60.
Just wanted to kind of finalize talking about challenges for special education. As Jackie had already shared, special education teachers are hard to find. They're hard to have certified teachers, especially with our teachers, our educational interpreters. We currently have positions open right now because that's not an area that people are typically going into. And we do have, our programs with our deaf and hard of hearing students. And then we have our speech and language therapists. Right now, we had 5 positions open this year that we did have to contract services out. We always have those positions out and looking for people. We've done a really good job of trying to work with HR and how do we get more speech and language therapists to the area. And so right now we had 5, but we are typically using staff due to retirement in that area. We also have 42 staff members on license with stipulation, so that means they are not certified in special education and they're working on their programming to get certified. So we need that additional support to help support them as they're working towards their degree. And then as Jackie had shared with contracted services, it is more expensive. So we are having virtual services in speech and language, and we also are having we have 1 visual impairment teacher that we're contracting with CISA, and then we also have 2 educational interpreters that are virtual as well this year.
I don't know if you're the correct group to ask this, but we're contracting out for virtual speech and language pathologist. What would be the possibility of us hiring someone to teach specifically virtual speech and language? So if we have someone that's in an area that may have retired from a different state, doesn't want to move, but would be willing to work with us full time doing virtual, is that, I'm looking and no one is making eye contact over there with me, so that's good. Is that something that would be feasible? Have other districts done that where they brought them on full time?
So last year we did have someone that we had worked with that out of state, and we worked with CISA for them to be hired that way because that's a more cost efficient way than some of the private, but you must have a Wisconsin license. So, and then, or you must be able to obtain a Wisconsin license, which sometimes some of the other states aren't as compatible. But we've gotten creative in a lot of ways to try to meet the needs when it comes to speech and language. Nicole's done a really nice job that way working with our HR department. We're on Indeed, we're on Weekend, we're on every place we can. We're attending every event we can as well. So the state knows, and they're talking about some things right now at the DPI level of what are the ways to increase, but part of it comes from the universities only have so many spaces that they allow in. So if this program allows 40 in, and this is the number we have retiring, that leads to part of our problem.
Ways that we have been working on then to address some of those challenges is last year we converted 2 of our academic program support teachers over to 2 program support teachers that support only the teachers that are on stipulation. And they do coaching cycles with the teachers to help them through their IEP process, setting up the classroom, multiple items. They take them through that coaching process. And then they also have their lead teachers too at the elementary level. It's not as much, but at the secondary level, they have their lead teachers. They also participate in the district's induction program like all other new teachers do. And the reason my voice is like this is because I just came from the new teacher training. So we also do that through special education. That's a program that runs once a month. We do a variety of topics, autism, behavior, academics, and then tonight we were working on best practices and compliance and how that looks in the classroom and how it really looks when you are providing the IEP as outlined to students. And that is pretty much what we have been doing to address the challenges. And I believe we're open for if there are any questions.
Last picture's just our kids because we think they're pretty awesome, and our teachers that work with them are too. So I think before the word you used, Laura, was fierce. And I would share with you, we have very dedicated special education teachers out there every day that are working to educate, problem solve around different things and work through issues with our kids. So if you do get that opportunity and you're in schools, if you could please let them know you recognize them, that'd be greatly appreciated.
It's fantastic. You know, you can be a teacher for a long, long time and never know a thing about special education.
I just want to clarify one thing, and I know that the intent is positive, but we always look at our students, you know, as all of our students. So when we're referring to it, you know, it's these students are Green Bay area school students who are receiving services. I mean, every student has challenges, every student has issues. So this is just one opportunity for us to offer those services within it, and it just even that phrasing helps remove some of that that stigma or misconceptions with it. I've had conversations with my own family, and I'm a special education teacher, of explaining like there's a lot under that umbrella. You know, the students I work with are completely different than students the teachers across the hall are working with, but we're just providing those services to meet them where they need to be. So
That's a good point to make, Brian. And I think the thing with it is, right, it's a collaborative process. It's not just the general education teacher, the special education teacher, it's everybody in the building that comes together to make it work. So.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Up next, we have our long-range library plan update. Thank you for your patience.
I would recommend that we take a 5-minute break.
Can we, this will be a quick one so they can be on their
very
way.
good. All
So
right,
after this, would that work?
sure.
Thank you, Board. Linda Teskey, Director of Literacy, and Raquel Rand, our Library and Media Coordinator, will now share with you an overview of our long-range library plan. The long-range library plan is required to be submitted to the state and on file, and it's also a part of our district web presence for our community and families to access as well.
Okay, the sheets I have given you are not the entire slideshow. They're just some of the pieces of it that I thought that might be helpful to have in front of you. So we'll go through the slideshow and then I will reference the different pages that we have in front of you. Also on the agenda, we do have the full library long-range plan as part of the memo. I did not put the full 13 pages on the slideshow because no one wants to see that. But I do hope you take some time to read through that. Okay, wonderful. And so I'm hoping to just highlight some of the high points of the plan and what it looks like for us here in Green Bay. So just a little bit of background. David, thank you for giving a little bit of that overview. So this is a required document underneath Wisconsin Administrative Code. The previous plan was approved in 2021, and I am going to touch a little bit on some of those goals that were approved by the board, those that were on it at that time. And then we're going to also look at what the new goals are. Part of our library plan is also talking about our common school funds, and that's also part of our Wisconsin Admin Code. We are very, very fortunate here in the state of Wisconsin that we have the common school funds, and it provides the funding for our schools to buy library books, makerspace items, and our digital resources. And so that is it's a very small portion in the overarching plan, but we are required to talk on that as well. As the libraries are a small section of our district, all of our goals go back to our district missions and priorities. And so as you read over it, you will have noticed in our first section that we have our district mission statement as well as district priorities. We do know that that is part of the work that is being done this year to look at and update some of those strategic priorities. And so that we also know that this is not just a static plan, right? Like this is a living document that we will continuously refer back to and work on. And so if those strategic priorities for the district drastically change, we would refer back to this and go, what are the changes that we need to make sure that our goals reflect back on what the district is working towards, so that we are not working in silos, that we are all working towards making sure that our students are successful. So this is a first page that is on your sheets in front of you. These are our 3 previous goals. And so all 3 of our goals in the previous document also had multiple objectives underneath it, as well as multiple action items. And so I just pulled out a very small part of each one just to highlight what those goals were. So we're creating and implementing a student-centered dynamic library curriculum. So one thing that's interesting with our libraries is we do not have a specific curriculum that we follow, but with our students being as transient as they can be, we realize that we need to be better about making sure that our students are always receiving the same information, no matter what schools are going to. And that's something that we are continuing to work on. We are also working to employ collection development practices that ensure equitable access to print, digital, and makerspace resources. And so we really worked on different things to make sure that our librarians knew best practices to find those books and resources. And that we will also lead beyond the library by serving as active members on building and district teams. I should also say our library team is made up of quite a few staff members, and all of our team then worked on committees to work towards these goals. So it wasn't just something that was done at a district level. The team was integral to this. As part of that second goal, as we employed those collection development practices, I just wanted to share a couple pieces of information in these charts. This is on that second sheet of yours with the items per student starting. So I have it broken out here by items by student for our elementary on the left side, and then items per student by our secondary students on the right side. One of our goals is that our students should have access to about 15 to 20. It really kind of depends. And so we know that we have a very large school with a little bit lower number of items per student at our secondary buildings. This has been constantly changing as we also look towards making sure that we take out old material, continuously bringing in new ones.
So that's not circulation numbers per student. That's items like available for them to be checked out.
Yes, that's correct.
And so I would assume that Preble High School having the lowest number would be because Preble High School is so big, right?
Yes, and going back to the Common School Fund, that is allocated by students as well. So we know that Preble is larger, and so they do get more money to fund towards that. But they've also supplemented in other ways to make sure that our students have access to materials. We do know that our secondary students check out less items that are elementary students, just due to the nature of the services that we provide in our buildings. And so we do see less circulations, going back to your comment, we do see less circulations at our secondaries, but we still want to provide the access to our students. And so that's where these items still are important for us to look at.
Is the definition of item restricted to book, or are there other things?
Great question. This one here is strictly by item, or the items are books that are available within our library. So we have a lot of other items that you can check out in our libraries, and that does not go back to these numbers here. We also have our digital books. That is also not, so we have access to Sora, which is one of our digital platforms, and those are not included in here. Based on some of the other conversations that were had previously here, this feels like this fits in really well as well for our conversation tonight. Going back to that second goal of ours with our collection development practices, making sure that our librarians have the tools and the resources to find those diverse texts and those social emotional learning texts. And so I've currently pulled out, once again, elementary numbers, but I also pulled out the percent because sometimes it's really helpful to see the percent when you have larger collections based on smaller collections. When I was pulling these stats, I was very excited to see that 20 to 40% for both our diverse texts and our SEL texts to support our students. And so just as a reminder, those social and emotional learning texts are really going towards how can students work on managing their emotions, setting goals, making decisions, things like that.
And those, that would be determined by an outside group, whether it's Follett or someone else that on a national level is recognizing this is recognized as a diverse text or an SEL text on it. So it's not our LMSs saying, okay, I feel this one would meet that guideline. That's some clearinghouse someplace.
Yes, that's correct. So we have a variety of publishers and companies that we buy our text from. And so depending on if it's a smaller independent company, depending on what kind of information comes in, there's probably a little bit of fluctuation. But yes, it's not something that the librarians within our team are determining. It's at a national level. This next one is just a follow-up only with our secondary numbers and our secondary percent. I'd really like to point out at our secondary level, the percentage numbers are a lot higher. They're more between the 30 and 55%, which is really exciting to see those numbers at that level. And then the last goal, talking about our librarians will be active members within our building and district teams. This chart is really just showing the collaboration that our librarians are able to interact with our classroom teachers as well as our spec ed teachers, our art teachers. We don't differentiate within here; it's just teachers, and so this is across all of our teachers. And so we had kind of broken it down by different schedule styles, and so it's very different between each building, and that's why you'll see some different fluctuations based on the different things that are happening. So we know this year our ELA teachers are taking on a really large new curricular resource, and so we know some of those collaborations might look different, and so all of that is to be expected with some of that fluctuation. We just want to continue being able to work with our teachers and our students. Okay, so within our goals, we refer back to our Future Ready framework. This is also a national framework that is used, I should say this is a framework that's used across the nation in many of our libraries. We've seen this framework in a variety of other places as well. And so when we go back to creating our new goals, we look at these different wedges as well as the outside, that collaborative leadership, as well as the inside, that learner-centered and focused. Everything should be coming back to that learner as our focus for any of our goals that we are working on. And so when we came to reevaluating our goals and our plan and what is the next steps, this is the framework that we used. So we looked at one of our goals. So this one is actually a continuation. And so that blue wedge, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. We decided that we really needed to continue on this goal of developing and implementing a comprehensive K-8 scope and sequence plan. Within the full document, we do have it broken down by the different steps. The one thing I'd love to point out is that knowing that, once again, going back to that ELA has that new curricular resource, we know that's a huge ask of our teachers. And so we really wanted to be cognizant of the fact that that's new learning for both our librarians and for our teachers of what that looks like for our students to be learners and readers within our classrooms and outside of our classrooms. And so that is one of our big action steps, is really making sure that we have an understanding of what that curricular resource looks like and how we can support that underneath this goal here. Our second goal is going back to that learner-centered literacy by creating a vibrant reading culture. Unfortunately, what we have seen is that, reading has kind of taken a back seat. Students aren't enjoying it as much anymore. And as librarians, that's why we get into it. We don't get into it to fix the technology. Some maybe do, but we get into it because we love reading and we love books and we love sharing books. And so we really wanted to find a way to bring back some of that joy into our libraries and with our students. And going back to how can we support our to see themselves in the books, and how can we support them in becoming readers who want to read. And our final goal, that the library department will establish and sustain community partnerships and involve community partners in school library programming and events. We know that we don't have all the resources and all the knowledge, and how can we leverage our community partners out there to bring in some different events for our students and to be able to support our students in their learning. One example, we have a lot of different tech clubs that are out there in the community, and how can we bring that in to support our students, because we know that coding is a really great thing that's going on, and it is a job force, right, that is booming and continues to boom. And so that was one of those pieces that we would like to bring into it.
Has there been discussion with like the Brown County Library? I know that they have their Arduino and they have some very specialized areas that they excel in throughout the state. Has there been a concerted effort to share programming events that the Brown County Library is offering to our students on a consistent basis? Like I'll go in and take the program guides and give them to teachers I know are, in the schools to distribute. But is there anything as a district level partnership with the Brown County Library to share and feed off of each other for programming?
That's a great question. That is something that we have lacked since the pandemic, honestly. Prior to it, we had some really great relationships. Specific buildings have really great relationships where they bring them in, or where the students are being brought to the libraries. And that is part of this, is making sure that we reevaluate what that collaboration looks like and how we can support them and how they can support us, so that we are utilizing the resources that are there. So we know that is an area that we know we need to build back up. That actually takes me to the end of my slideshow. If there's other questions as well.
Do the building level librarians, it's a common school fund with it, do they have a quick response if there's like requests for books? What's the approval process as far as if someone comes in and has an interest in a certain topic, and like dinosaurs or whatever, and said, okay, I've heard this book is really great, can we get it? Or this copy seems to be out all the time. What's the responsiveness at a building level as far as being able to order books?
Yes. So we actually have a couple different processes. If there's something that's already in the library, librarians have their own procurement card so that they can put orders in consistently. And so if they get an order like it's super urgent, right? A classroom teacher, I really need this book. We actually can go out to faster retailers like Amazon. That's not our first choice. That's our, hey, we need this now. Our first choice is our large companies that provide it, but they do have that. We also, as you'll be seeing later on in your work session today, we do have policy in place that talks about how do you look at to determine if a book is appropriate. And so we have all those processes in place.
I guess my question isn't whether the book's appropriate or not, but the promptness that the librarians can get that book into that student's hands. I recognize, going through library bound ones and, the services on that, but I don't know if you've heard, sometimes in Green Bay, it takes a little while to get stuff approved. So is it a pretty quick process as far as we trust your professional judgment? Here's your budget. This kid wants this book. It's a good book and meets what we're looking for. And we have a confident circulation approach to it, whatever, that the librarians can make that decision.
Yes. So I have, as I oversee the large library, but the library programming, but each of our librarians are all licensed. And they all have, once again, going back to, they have to go back and get extra licensure to be employed within the library programming. And so they are all given ability to make those choices as well.
And I'd say it's very quick turnover because they can make that request right away. Raquel approves it, then I just approve it, but it's really fast. And they have their P cards, so they can get those right away.
So like Leanna, yeah, it was a very interesting read, your plan. And I learned something because I did not know that the librarian services were responsible for the makerspaces and that equipment that is in the makerspaces. And I don't know that you know the answer to the question that I'm about to ask. But how many makerspaces do we have in the district, and what kind of equipment are we talking about, and that you term as a collection in them?
So I was lucky enough to be informed so I could be prepared for that question. And so we have the makerspaces that are not tied to our tech ed. And so that is primarily in our elementary schools then. So I'm not looking at any of our secondary schools. They don't have separate spaces. We have 10 of our schools have a separate room from our makerspaces. I'm sorry, we have 10 of our buildings have a separate room for our makerspaces that may be next to, but is not directly in the library. And 2 of ours that have like full areas within the libraries. 2 of our new renovation buildings that have a large makerspace area within there. Some of the items that you might see in there are going to be our 3D printers. We also have 3D pens. Those are a little bit more friendlier for our students. A lot of the different coding tools. So we have like different coding mice. We have B-bots, different, they're called dash and dots that you can program on your iPads, and it's all those different coding pieces. But we also look at it as not just the tech piece, there's also sometimes just those tangible things. What are some of the building things? And so we have, they look like Jenga blocks, and there are activities for the students to be thinking critically of how can you build a structure with only so many pieces? How can you build a structure, right, that could hold them out? And so we're starting at the elementary age with some of those pieces that we know will be explored later on as well.
I appreciate the response. So there is a transition at the secondary level where tech ed kind of takes over of that responsibility. Okay, I appreciate the understanding now. When you look at the distribution, again, may not be prepared, but I would love follow up if you can. Distribution of the resources and the funding associated with it, whether you feel like there's adequate funding for those makerspaces, and if you feel like you're keeping up with the demand in those spaces. As I mentor a robotics team outside of this job, day job, and everything, and I, like you, feel like it's an incredibly important service that we need to provide in preparing someone for the future workforce, and really interested in kind of where we stand as a district in our spend towards these kind of creative spaces at the elementary and the middle school levels, in preparation for entering secondary education and the workforce that will demand these kind of skills going forward.
What I can say is that with the Common School Fund, we are very lucky because we can use the Common School funds for these makerspace items as long as it is not a consumable. So one of our things that we do struggle with is any of the 3D printers, the filament. That is a consumable. And so we can buy the 3D printer itself, but if we're going to upkeep it, the filament needs to come from the district supply money. And that's always been a little bit tricky for that.
Could you please just remind me what Common School Fund means?
So back in a long time ago, I don't remember the year, when the state was creating a lot of its policies, it set aside money into what is called the Common School Fund. And I don't remember all of the ways that we get it, but there are a variety of ways. I know some of it is what I've been told is tickets, some different land holdings. We've had a really great state treasurer that has been investing the money. And so it goes into a pot of money that is then distributed out to schools based on a percentage by each student. There's money allocated towards each student, and then it is to be used under the discretion of the district librarian.
I just want to tell you that I read your entire written report and I thought it was just phenomenal. And it feels like as we start our strategic planning process, you folks are way ahead of the game. You're ready to jump in.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Nice job.
All right. Yes, I'm gonna do a 5-minute recess, but it's got to stay brief. We still have some work ahead and it's getting late, so. Okay, guys, we're gonna get back at it. Who's doing operations?
I don't know. Rick. Operations, you or Chris? Okay.
Okay, we're gonna get started again. Next on the agenda is operations, and that'll be facilitated by Rick.
All right, we've got two agenda items. The first one will be membership numbers update. Kale Puchinski.
Thank you. We'll have a slide deck here. So this will be just an update of our membership count as of our third Friday count in September. I'm utilizing a previous slide deck format, so I hope some can recognize it. If you have any questions, please jump in. First, we'll just explain these numbers are based on the third Friday count from September 24. You will see numbers from the previous count in January, but as noted here, those numbers can be revised after, before they are certified. And we typically do that also in June. So we'll reflect reflect those changes back to the third Friday and second Friday counts, those changes made up until June of that year. No. This slide just acknowledging that attendance is taken into consideration for these third Friday and second Friday counts. If a student is not in attendance that day, that can be counted at a later date if they attend before and after the count. So again, why you can see some fluctuation in these numbers up until that date in June. And then based on just a financial impact piece, how the membership FTE impacts our district financially in regards to revenue limit. You can see the dollar amount there of $11,325 per FTE. That number does fluctuate. And then components to that, as you can see the formula to get to our membership count. Head count, open enrollment in, open enrollment out, resident reduction, which we clarified recently for myself. That is for students attending schools part-time, whether from homeschool or parochials, coming in for at least 2 courses in our district. That is a small number, as you'll see coming up. And then membership FTE, just to acknowledge that early childhood in 4K is a partial factor. So sorry, this is a little small, but I believe this was shared out. And if not, we can certainly do that again. So this is just a little history. Obviously, we'll focus on the September 24 count. So that membership count changed to the negative about 151. And then this is just about a 10-year history back showing the January and the September counts of the last counts that were modified in June, if that makes sense. Sorry if I'm not explaining that great. And then next, we just have the open enrollment membership counts. So on the column on the left is our open enroll in, which is up, as you can see, by 6. Again, about a 10-year look at this. And then on the right is our open enroll out, which also increased by 19. And then membership count. So this is the actual head count from the third Friday counts in September. As you can see, that's reduced by 164 for our head count. And that goes into that membership formula. This is a reminder of our voucher reimbursement rates before we take a look at vouchers, voucher count. Of the three different rates and then the independent charter school rate. Below, we did identify the amount of students from 65 up to 94 in this September's third Friday count.
All right, Brian.
So just for clarification on that voucher reimbursement rate, that comes from the school district first, correct? The state gives us funding and then we pay the voucher schools based on those numbers.
I believe that is correct. That's funded to us and then to, sorry, I'm just looking at Angie for clarification.
James.
Is it correct to say that the state does, or the funding comes through us and out, but the funding comes from the local tax levy, not the state of Wisconsin?
I'm getting a head nod from Angie as well.
So my point is either way, we're paying that amount to the local charter schools or the voucher schools, especially with that special needs scholarship program of $15,409 for each student. Okay.
I think it's more, is it more accurate to say that our local taxpayers are paying for that? I mean, yeah.
This is just a chart kind of explaining again kind of that same time frame. The total vouchers, the cap number that is increasing. So the cap number this year, so that does increase every year. This year it's 9% of our membership creates that voucher cap. As you can see, we don't hit that cap. But then also the total levy, that is the total levy dollar amount in the yellow line there for the vouchers. And then the red is the total amount of voucher students that we actually have. And I just have two more here. So these are the voucher rates for K-8 in blue, 9 through 12 in red, and then special needs scholarship program in yellow. Again, you can see that increasing. And the last one. And this is just showing our levy percentage change. This does reflect the most recent info with the passage of the referendum for our total district levy. And then as you saw in the two slides previous, that voucher levy for the private schools as well. So you can see that dollar amount change as well. I believe that is it for this year's membership update.
Brian.
I think we went over it, but I know in our pre-meeting, we talked about the difference of open enrollment in and open enrollment out within the district. And if I'm correct on it, it was a net difference of like 27 students, that we have 27 more students open enrolling out of Green Bay as opposed to open enrolling in, not taking into consideration vouchers in charter schools or the independent charter schools. Am I correct on that number?
I don't believe so. We have 19 more going out, but we do have an increase of open enroll in. So I guess the net then would be 13. Yeah.
Is a good message to have that, this isn't, students aren't fleeing out of Green Bay to neighboring districts, that the change is 13 students. So I mean, we're drawing in students to our district from other districts as well for the programming that we offer.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. As you look at the open enroll out over the last 10 years here, or not quite 10 years. I've been saying 10 years. I should have said a little less with that, but you can see that fluctuation has been fairly minimal.
And that's also taking into consideration that we do not open enroll in students who receive services for an IEP. That's been our policy for many years, as far as these are students coming in for our programming that we offer, that 13 students out of 18,000 students, there's not some mass exodus out of Green Bay into other districts.
At least I would say certainly not a change, right? So that's been consistent around that, around that 2,000 mark. So no, I would say I think you're correct in that thought process.
Okay, any more questions? All right, thank you, Kale. Next item is the Human Resources Information System, Tyler Enterprise Software Update. Mike Freeze. And Angie.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for the opportunity. Happy Veterans Day. Thanks to all that have served, and appreciate your service again, as echoed earlier by Ingrid. The Tyler Technologies Enterprise project is well underway, and Angie's going to address the first aspect that's been completed, and I'll talk a little bit about where we are and where we're headed these next few months.
Yep. So like Mike said, there's kind of two parts to the implementation of the new ERP system, or Tyler Enterprise. There was a memo attached in the board agenda, so that has a lot of the specifics. So I'm just going to highlight where the accounting department and the procurement department are regarding implementing for the financial side of the house. So phase one, as of July 1, we are live, so we are no longer in Power School. We have moved forward, so the general ledger, all of our journal entries, the procurement module, so anything from creating a requisition to a PO to paying invoices, accounts receivable, all of those systems or modules are in place since July. So we had our initial training sessions conducted over the summer for all of the users on that software. We have training modules out there, and then now we just train as users. If we have new employees that come into the district, then we train them on how to create a PO and the essential functions that they need as a user of the system, depending on their role. So there are many training documents, videos that have been published out there for the financial side of things. So now we are entering into kind of that phase two. So for me, that includes now working with our technology department to create some of those some of the reports that are kind of, I don't know, kind of special or unique to our department. So things that are needed or that we need or are used to seeing. Now we're kind of working with technology to get those processes and reports into play. Of course, Tyler has reporting that we are using, and they work fine, and everybody is chugging along. But there are some things that we are going to need some needs. So we're working closely with technology, and then the budget implementation process. So I guess my world has consisted of being in Tyler and in Power School. So we are now working on pulling that budget over into Tyler. In fact, we just did that today successfully. So the 24-25. So now what we're doing is we're kind of posting our payroll, our payroll general ledger, because we're not in Tyler for payroll. So we post those every, on the 16th and on the 30th. So then all of the information is housed in Tyler. So when we pull reports, we have all the financial statement data that we need to to project and things like that. So a little bit of a transition, but overall smooth transition for the financial side of things, and we're moving along.
Are there any questions about that, the first portion that's been completed on the finances and where they're headed next? It's been a lot of new learning for myself. A lot of the new acronyms. I know we talk up here a lot of times about the acronyms in education. There's a lot of acronyms in the business world as well. And so I'm learning a lot of those, including ERP. So Enterprise Resource Planning. It basically describes a software system that helps manage the business side of operations. That was a new learning for me as part of this process. And so the HR payroll side includes a variety of modules as our memo outlines. And so we're staggering that out. The overall project is kind of a 6-stage process. And so we're moving our way through the stages, and then within the platform, within the ERP, the different modules, so payroll and human resources, we're working our way through those 6 stages. And we're at the point where the data is in, and then the team is practicing within the system to make sure things are operating as intended. And so we're in that, we want to really do that testing phase correctly and then clean up any mistakes or errors, because we do not want to go live, get started on things that would result in errors. We want to minimize and eliminate entirely any errors wherever possible. Obviously, accurate payroll is crucial, and so we will not go live with the payroll portion until we're confident and have run multiple, run one here, see do they look exactly right? Okay, cool. And then we'll do the same sorts of things with our staffing pieces, et cetera. So a lot of work yet to do in these next few months, and we will update our benchmarks and our go live options as we progress. So,
Brian?
Could you explain to me what makes up the remaining parts of employee self-service?
I will try. Essentially, right now, our staff have something called Employee Online. So they can see some aspects of their, existence as an employee. Employee self-service within Tyler, when we populate things with payroll information, then they would have access to that. The remaining parts would include things such as credentials, licensing, history, jobs you've applied for, jobs you've accepted. So it's going to be a more robust view profile. And so those remaining parts will come into play as we add in additional modules. So for instance, you could see your evaluation results. That's how you could possibly see that. You could see other aspects to your benefits pieces. So initially the payroll goes in, that's what you see. Then you have the other pieces.
I have a follow-up with that. So we have the opportunity to select some modules. You said as far as benefits and different things, like there's aspects that we can control as a district that you can give to the programmers on it, correct? So it's not a canned program of these are the federal regulations that you need to have. There's leeway within our district.
Could you give me maybe a specific example?
So if we had opportunities for student or staff to contribute to their 503B plan, and it comes out, I don't know if we do that or not with it, but would they be able to increase or decrease that amount through employee self-service, or would they be able to adjust their number of their tax deductions on it, their benefits on that?
Thanks for the couple examples there. Yeah, so there are what are called employee initiated actions, and as opposed to the current or old days of what do I do, where do I go within their profile, it would say, would you like to make a change to your bank? Would you like to make an update to your W-4? Do you want to make adjustments to your 403? We have to verify which ones of these items we would bring on board at what time, so that we can make sure that it's, but yes, the short answer is yes.
So we would be able to control some of those aspects as far as what we would offer that would be unique to Green Bay.
I don't know if it would be unique to us. I apologize.
I'll be very blunt with this. When this program came forward, I asked about year-round pay. Is this something that would be able to fit within the employee self-service that would be an easy enrollment. And I'm not necessarily looking for a yes or no on this. I just want to kind of put this out there as well. Is this something that employees would be able to use as an option to get to the end of discuss? Would this be an easy way to allow employees to opt into that would decrease the amount of payroll and energy going into it to implement a new plan with it?
It's a way where we could find out if somebody was expressing interest in that change, but then that triggers, we set up things within the system to trigger workflow. So if somebody says, I would like to request the following, whatever the thing is, whether it be a year-round pay, 403B, more or less withholdings, life event, had a child, got divorced, got married, right? That triggers a workflow, and then the workflow alerts who needs to take the next step on the action. So the short answer is yes, we can configure it to the things we want to have people let us know they want changed. And then we have to determine as a district the practices that are reasonable and allowable within whatever the changes may be. But yes, short answer, yes.
And those practices would be followed by policy. Okay.
James?
When reading this memo, I actually had a question that I posed to Vicky earlier and pose it to you as well. So in phase 2, human resources, you have an enumeration of modules that the system will expose. And as we look into 2025, there's obviously seasonality in what we do, and we are rapidly approaching the time where we will be, seeking applicants, and those applicants will turn into employees, which will turn into open enrollments, across the process. And the last sentence of page 1 saying targeting go live of July 1st seems to be after that seasonality, which means we would kind of postpone the value delivery for a year until the next seasonality of, tracking applicants, whatever. And I wonder if there are any dependencies. Are these modules dependent on a successful payroll implementation, and only then can you implement the additional modules? Or if we, through resourcing differently or whatever, can work in parallel so that we can actually receive the value of this? Because the question I didn't ask this morning, just because it was impromptu, is I don't know the licensing mechanism and whether we are, incurring kind of a full expense of the ERP and just not receiving the entire value out of that expense, which would play into my bias to make sure that we hit some dates and hit some windows so that we could use the functionality. Because I think we would all agree that our current application tracking system is something we would throw out the window as quickly as possible once we have a better solution.
Yes, so that exact set of questions, I don't know if I said them quite as eloquently as you just did, but like I did ask those questions earlier today of our team as we did our status check-in to say, if such and such is maybe, if this original benchmark date for this module was here and it got moved to there, does that mean we could reorder and get, for example, evaluations, recruitment, applicant tracking onboarded first? And so the team has meetings with Tyler throughout this week based on different work groups, and I'll have a better answer to that at the end of this week. I am not willing to, and you're not asking this, but I'm not willing to compromise getting the best candidates in that sweet spot of hiring because we're uncertain about, well, they're ready, but oh gosh, they tried to apply and it didn't work. Oh no, we don't have time for that. So I would rather wait if it push comes to shove in that regard. So we won't push out a new process if we're not truly ready for it with regards to that, because we can continue to limp through another spring season and just keep working on communication internally.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you. And that's it for operations.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started with the policy and governance. We have additional revisions to Board of Education policies and rules in the 300-400 series policy, and we'll welcome Melissa to the table.
Good evening. I think we are starting with the teaching and learning policies for tonight. I will go through them and stop me if you have questions. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. Up first is policy 342.3, our programs for gifted and talented students. This policy was last revised 5, and as you can see from the existing policy, consisted of 2 very short paragraphs with an additional sentence at the end. Gina Cornu worked with her team and with teaching and learning as well to draft a policy that is consistent with our practice and purpose of the program and defines the roles and responsibilities for the program. Any questions on that one?
I think I saw Brian first. James.
There seems to be a lot of discussion within public education and the labeling that we use, whether it's gifted and talented or talent development. And I don't know if this would necessarily, since we're reviewing the policy, whether this would be something that we would want to kick back, whether we'd want to continue with it as gifted and talented or switch over to talent development. 2 different approaches. I don't want to reinvent the wheel and cause massive change with it, but I'm just wondering if the editorial changes might be a good time to look at it, depending on what the department thinks.
I will bring that back.
No, thank you. So in the school district, we obviously have multiple ways of delivering gifted and talented instruction, and one's a chartered program and not a chartered program, right? That's an appropriate use. One is a board approved program, and then there are other mechanisms for doing this. Does this policy supersede or in any way interact or modify the board approved programming, or is it just a consistency mechanism to make sure that identification and others means are taken into consideration?
The latter.
All right, anything else? Okay, we'll move on to the next one.
Okay, the next few policies deal with our library media centers, and you heard from our very talented and smart staff already tonight on our library media plan. These policies do address that as well. The first one that's up is policy 361.1, selection and reconsideration of library media center materials and resources. Not too many changes to this policy, just updating positions and updating references in that policy. And similarly, that's also the updates in the accompanying rule.
Okay, questions? Okay, we'll move along.
Policy 362 and Rule 362 address library media centers and services, as well as the privacy guidelines for circulation records. Currently, the existing policy again is 2 paragraphs. The teaching and learning department has defined roles and responsibilities, and then we've also updated the references in the policy and the rule.
Okay, questions on that? All right, we'll continue then.
Okay, policy and rule 362.1 addresses resource sharing and interlibrary loan. These policies were last updated in 2005, so technology has come a long way on how those resources are shared. So there were a number of updates related to technology. Also, you heard Raquel talk about how we get access to materials that we don't own, and this is one of those tools that we use to get resources from other libraries.
Brian?
So Ed, I really like the part under definitions A2, where it says interlibrary loan activities are not intended as a replacement for library media center collection development. So thanks for us taking a policy, hopefully that says we're not just going to borrow everything, and if we need it, we're going to buy it. So.
All right, anything else? Okay, we'll move ahead.
Okay, policy 411.2 411.2 and Rule 411.2 addresses our federally and state required policies on our students who experience homelessness. These were updated to reflect the current laws and practices, updating for positions, and then also updating our references. And thank you to Lisa Bynum and Elizabeth Webb who updated these policies for us.
Any, Rick?
I just had one observation about in definitions, paragraph A, number 2, trailer park. Does that mean like temporary, like recreational trailer parks or mobile home communities?
Yeah, it means the transitional trailer park where you park your RV, those sorts of things, not a mobile home settlement. It's your permanent residence.
Does that need some clarification? Because I had the question in my mind.
I believe this is taken directly from the DPI's information, but I can go back and ask Elizabeth and Lisa.
Because you have campground right next to it. And that to me that would include parking my trailer there. So that's why I had the question.
I will follow up.
Okay, we'll move ahead.
The last set in this series is policy and rule 411.3, which deals with our students who are in out-of-home care, foster care. That has been broadened to not just be foster care, but there's lots of out-of-home care situations our students are now experiencing. We have added additional information to this policy and updated positions and references to the policy and rule for better clarification.
All right, questions? Okay. We'll go ahead and add forward.
Okay, up next is our pupil services and special education special education policies and rules. I just want to take a moment between the 300 and 400 series. I know I've said this before, but there's about 230 policies. We're down to about 40 needing to be done. So we continue to make headway, and I just want to thank all of the team for working on this because it's been a slog, but it's really, really, really important work for our children and their equity. So with respect to policy 443.1, for those of you that have been on the board for a few years, you know that we've come a long way in our student dress policy. And thankfully, we don't have too many updates in this policy this time because we've done all that hard work. Thanks to our ICSC who really was working hard on making sure that that policy addressed our students. We just have minor changes to make sure that it's inclusive for gender and disability. We've updated pronouns and then updated references.
Questions? I will just note that there's a lot of there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not earbuds could be concealed, and it looks like we found a resolution in here saying that the ear must be visible, which I'm glad we found that because there was some consternation about that. So.
Just a comment and an observation as some of the schools that I have visited, what I don't see is an equal application of the enforcement of the standards. I see hoodies, I see guys walking around with their pants hanging half off of their behinds, with no corrections made. So what I would ask is that there be some review of the enforcement of the standards across all of the schools to make sure that there's universal compliance.
So the policy does provide that students can have their hoods up as well as wear hats, as long as your face is visible.
How does that go with the ears being visible? There's a conflict there.
if teachers ask to see the ears, to make sure that you don't have earbuds in, you're required to show your ears during class.
Still holding, I'm not seeing consistent application of the standard. It needs to be reviewed.
I mean, technically, the ear rule is being added to the policy here. It was I mean, that was an issue that was unaddressed, which is why it's added here. It's one of the, probably the only thing that changes much on the day-to-day by this policy. It is a slight addition, so that could modify certain headwear. But yes, it should be, we should have consistency of how we're doing this. Anything else? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew.
We'll continue on.
Okay, policy and rule 443.8 deals with antisocial behavior, and I've gotten a few questions on what that means. And really, that's a group of students or a few students that are affiliated and advocate for intimidation or physical harm. That's sort of behavior that is not acceptable in our schools. So we've really just updated references and a few minor changes in the rule to have more proactive rather than reactive language towards the end of that rule.
Questions here? Okay, we'll continue on.
Okay, the next is the policy and rule related to staff use of physical force and physical restraint and seclusion. This policy and rule were updated to address the changes of positions, as well as updating language to reflect our statutory requirements. Not a lot of changes in the policy and rule.
All right, questions? All right.
Okay, next and last is a change in our EpiPen policy, or our administrating medication to students related to our EpiPens. Our nurse lead, Pam Weiss, has been on the forefront of watching the developments in epinephrine, and epinephrine is going to come out in an inhaler, not just an auto injector. Our policy reflects just the self-curing of the auto injector. So the changes when the inhalers are released will allow our students to self-carry inhalers.
Questions here? All right, then these will all be up for vote at the regular board meeting. And that concludes policy and governance.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, that is the end of our agenda. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
You have been watching the Green Bay Area Public School District's Board of Education meeting. Please visit the school district's website, www.gbaps.org, for more information on the district and future meeting dates. If you cannot fully access the information on this video, please let us know the accessibility issue you are having by calling 920-448-2025 or by email at communications@gbaps.org. We will try to provide the information to you in an alternative format and/or make the necessary improvements to make the information accessible.